for everybody online will be starting in about 5 minutes or so.
initial investment, the amazing 50-year amortization. It's something that we really believe is really changing the industry of Canada, making Canadian real estate amazing and great again. So if you're an agent after this presentation, or if you're an owner of a brokerage, please feel free to reach out to me. We definitely want to help you grow your business and help this learning curve of what we're doing over here. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jake to let you know what we're up to.
We might be having a technical issue online, so 1 second.
Okay, we're going to need 1 second.
We got screwed up with the microphone today. We had to go to a backup microphone. Yeah, it's working now.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. We normally don't have that many technical issues. I mean, we use these mics almost every single day, and I don't know. They decided that they didn't want to work properly, so we had to go old school. I've never used a microphone like this, so I'll try my best not to yell into it or make any kind of crazy noises. But what are we here to talk about today? Well, some of you may have seen our other seminars that I post online. Some of you may be interested in CMHC. Some of you may already be investors, right? But we are here to talk today about why CMHC MLI Select and why specifically with Alberta combined is kind of, in my opinion at least, the best place to place your capital in 2025 and was also the best place to place your capital in 2024. Whoops. So I like to start this off with this saying, and you guys are probably saying, what the hell does that mean? But it's Fries oder Strib, and it is a German term that means sink or swim. Or you could say adapt or die, or evolve or become dust, or whatever you want to say. But as Keithika started off by saying, the Toronto market is challenging. Whether you're an agent or whether you're an investor or whether you're someone looking how to place your capital and how to make money, the fact of the matter is that the way we've been investing for the last decade clearly does not work. I mean, we saw how many condos sold in 2024? Like 10% of normal volume, under 4,000 units. So now is the time when you can adapt, whether you're an agent in this room looking to keep your business going, or whether you're an investor who's looking to place money where it's actually going to make the money. You can either adapt or you can die. And we started adapting last year, and we changed our business model, and we changed what we offer, and we're swimming. We're swimming very well. We're swimming like Michael Phelps when he won 8 gold medals in a single Olympics, right? Despite our technical issues and not knowing how to use YouTube Live, unfortunately. So, 90% of all millionaires became so through owning real estate. More money has been made in real estate than in all other industrial investments combined. And the wise young man or wage earner of today invests his money in real estate. And who said that? Sure, the man needs no introduction, but in case some of you do not know who Andrew Carnegie is, his name is right there, Carnegie Steel. And if you've ever been in New York City, he owns quite a bit of downtown New York City. At one point, he was one of the wealthiest people on the planet. He's long dead now. That's why it says wise young man, because back then women weren't allowed to work, but luckily they are now. So the question then I ask, and I love to ask, is how many people in this room invest in real estate? I do. And how many of the people in this room have become millionaires from investing in real estate? Okay, this room's pretty good today. I will say that. But what you'll notice is a lot more people put up their hand that they invest than are millionaires. And the question then becomes, why is that, right? If Andrew Carnegie, who invested in real estate but made all his money manufacturing, still says that 90% of the wealth created out there is from real estate, then why do so many people fail to get rich through real estate? And in my opinion, it's because they've been taught wrong the entire time. And maybe it's a failing of society, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's just that they never sat around the kitchen table and talked about the stuff all the time. But people get taught completely wrong. They're into retail level investing. They're buying individual condos, they're buying individual townhomes, buying individual houses, and they're renting them out. And they think, this is all I can afford. This is how I get started. This is how I make a nest egg, right? And most people's conversations growing up were, pay off my mortgage. Oh, we're waiting for someone? Pay off my mortgage, right? Immediately. Get it, the American dream, the Canadian dream. Pay off my mortgage, have no debt, get out of debt, pay cash for things, that sort of thing. They don't teach you in school how to leverage capital. They don't teach you how to create a proper capital stack and how to actually make your money make money. And I think even further is the question is, why even invest in real estate at all? Because if your goal is just to make a little nest egg, if your goal is to, save a little money for retirement, what's the point? Buy a REIT. There's a bunch of REITs out there that produce 10 to 15% annualized long-term returns, right? They might have a cash flow or a dividend 5-6%, and they have appreciation. Like Skyline pushes around 13-14% over the long run. So why go through the headache of buying your own property and dealing with all the bullshit that comes along with it if you want to make a little nest egg or have a little money for retirement? And I think that's the root of the issue, is that fundamentally people have been taught to invest wrong and for the wrong reasons. We are here today to talk about this program. And obviously it's going pretty well because we sold alone in January 200 units, over $60 million of product in Alberta. So when it comes to saying sink or swim, as I said, we're swimming, right? Whether you're an agent in this room who's looking for a way to buoy your business or to find good products for your investors, or whether you're an investor in this room. The other thing about this is that is approximately $2.5 to $3 million of net cash flows for our investors sitting right there, right? So that's not just me bragging, oh, we sold a shitload of real estate, what's up? It's the fact that these projects are going to make our investors money. They're going to make them a lot of money, okay? And they're going to be making a lot of money and have the ability to leverage and keep growing that portfolio and actually build real wealth in real estate, not just save for a rainy day or hope that when they retire they can have a little bit more money. So we are here today to talk about how we can use that and retrain your mind kind of in the way you think and basically tell you that everything society's told you for the last 30 years is wrong, and utilize kind of the programs that the 1% of the 1% use to build actual wealth, right? And when I talk about actual wealth, I'm talking about what impacts your life. And to me, I like to use the example of, can I go on a business class flight anywhere in the world on vacation and not give a shit? And if you can do that, then you've impacted your life. If you say, I bought an investment property and I save an extra $100 a month or $200 a month, you haven't really changed your life. You haven't really added enough value that it's worth the headache of owning the property. You should just buy a REIT, right? So how does this work? And how is it that we can generate so much cash flow and so many good outcomes for investors in just a single month? The answer is through using CMHC MLI Select. But we can back up a little bit and we can just talk about what is the CMHC in the first place, right? So CMHC is a Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. I'm sure most people in this room know what it is. But if you really want to distill it down, they provide financing solutions, including mortgage insurance, to buyers. And that's really all they do. They have some other programs, but that stuff's a little too spicy and cool for me. The core of their business is making it possible for lenders to give crazy loans at the end of the day. That's what they do one way or another. They're a federal program mandated to encourage housing. They were created a long, long time ago. The programs they've offered have evolved and changed over the years, but they exist to help Canadians get housing one way or another. In the news, back in September, they announced one of the biggest changes they've ever had, which is going to $1.5 million in 30-year 30-year amortizations for personal lending for houses, right? Because housing was becoming extremely unaffordable and out of reach for a lot of people. They expanded their offering to make it easier for people to buy a little bit more. And a lot of people know this and probably seen it in the news. This was September. Also in September was then they announced, it might have been October, I don't have a date on there, I think it maybe was October, but they announced that they would offer a new lending program for 4-unit projects, for multiplexes, little fourplexes, where they'd go up to $2 million, started last month. It's actually created some headaches for us, which I'll jokingly explain later, but where they do 90% loan to value on these little fourplexes, right? So if you own a house in Toronto, you want to add a garden suite or something like that, you can utilize a program like this to get lending at a higher ratio to help you build that and get great financing terms. But that's not the program that we're here talking about today. See, that's what I call sort of the residential lending department. We're here to talk about the commercial lending side of CMHC, or the non-personal lending side of CMHC. They have a variety of programs, but the sort of top of the line one that we're looking at is the MLI Select program. That's why they put Select on there. It's essentially commercial lending mandated to help get more apartment buildings built, renovated, improved, right? So still under that exact same core motto of get more housing in the hands of Canadians. They realize that the government probably not the best people to build and manage buildings. If you think about all the community housing built by cities and feds and stuff like that, it doesn't go that well, right? So they create financing incentives to make it feasible to either buy apartment buildings and improve them, or to take land and develop it into new projects. So what is it that they really do? Well, they offer mortgage lending insurance for multi-unit developments. And we consider a multi-unit anything 5 or more doors. They offer incredibly favorable financing. And they have kind of tiers of incentives depending on how much you give back. So like any government program, they want their pound of flesh, or their sort of social responsibility or their social cause. And they kind of have 3 categories you need to draw from and work from, which are the affordability, the accessibility, and the energy efficiency categories. So when you give them more, you get more points, you get more juicy stuff, right? So how do you qualify a project for this program? Pretty simple, right? Super simple chart. I don't encourage you to spend too much time trying to memorize this or trying to take photos of it, because you can literally type into Google CMHC MLI Select, and the very first page will have these charts readily available for you. Now, we focus primarily on the pre-construction side of things, or the new development side of things. When you go to their website, make sure that you are checking if it's new construction or resale, because there's different requirements, there's different point systems. There's both sets of charts are on the same page, so make sure you're looking at the right one. Yes? It is? Nope, that doesn't say amortization. That says median household income. Correct, because that was for their personal lending. Right? So what we were talking about there, I was showing examples, and just to explain for people at home, generally we'll hold questions to the end, but someone just asked, is it 30-year AMs? And what I was saying is those programs that I showed previously are under their personal lending side. They're not under their commercial lending. A lot of people don't really know about the commercial lending side. That's kind of the program that up until very recently, not a lot of people knew existed, right? So we'll get into kind of what those offerings are. But without trying to memorize this chart, essentially you get these points from different categories for hitting different targets. So you can pick from your affordability, your energy efficiency, or your accessibility. Our goal is always to get to 100 points, because you get the best incentives, which we'll show you in another chart here. The only requirement from CMHC is that some of your points have to come from the affordable category. Right? So you can't just go into accessibility and pick 30, and well, you wouldn't even get there anyway, but you can't pick from only the other categories. You have to have an element of affordable. And we'll discuss why in Alberta this is not a real big problem. But essentially, once you add up all those points, and your goal is always to get to 100, you get to this chart, which shows you kind of what you get. And we don't really even care about 50 or 70. We care about the 100 points, where you can get the 50-year amortization, as you suggested, and then you get some other really nice stuff, like potentially limited recourse on the loans and some other really nice incentives. But the real key elements here are that you can get up to 95% loan to cost. And we'll discuss in a lot more detail what that means, but the key words here are up to. You won't always get it, and we'll explain why, right? There's people out there, I see a lot of poorly engineered ads on Instagram and Facebook these days that say only 5% down. It's up to 95%. It's not guaranteed by any means. Up to a 50-year mortgage amortization. And what you don't see on here is that you can get up to 10-year terms on your interest on your loan, so that you have extreme financial security, and you're getting extremely aggressive below prime rate locked-in rates. So what are these requirements and how do they play out? Because especially the affordability scares a lot of people. I sit in meetings almost every single day, all week long, and very often I hear people say the words low-income housing. I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that affordable housing is not low-income housing. They are two very, very different things. And every time I hear a buyer or a realtor or an investor say that, I immediately correct them. Low-income housing are government-based programs where they're picking a tenant, they're installing them in your home, in your apartment building or in your rental, right? You don't really have a say over it. Affordable homes are simply homes that are at or below a certain benchmark rent for that area. CMHC has a formula that they use to determine what those rents are. Now, they say the formula is 30% of the median household income in that neighborhood. I can tell you that is not actually what they use, because if they did, then in Calgary it would be $2,500 a month, whereas it's actually $1,740 a month. I think what they do is they start with the formula, they look at it and go, that looks too high, and then they play with the numbers a little bit, because they also haven't updated it in a lot of areas in quite a while. But regardless, all that they really care about is that you have a percentage of those doors rented at or below that number. They do not generally speak to what the unit is, per se, right? There's some limitations, but they're not telling you that you have to rent someone the penthouse floor with marble floors and gold toilets at an affordable rate. They're just saying you have to provide a warm, building code compliant, occupancy permitted space that's, you know, your 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, whatever, and it has to be at or below that price. So what does that mean is that we're able to get creative when we're engineering new buildings. We're able to allocate those affordable components to smaller units, and we're also able to charge higher fees on other elements of the project. What do I mean by that? You could have a building where parking is included with every unit, but on your affordable units, parking could be an extra cost. Locker could be an extra cost, anything like that. Or maybe normally parking's $100 a month, and on your affordable units, it's $300, right? CMHC only truly cares that your actual abode, the place where the person sleeps at night and washes their dishes and stuff, is at that affordable benchmark. They don't care that it's the penthouse with the marble floors and the gold toilets, and they don't care if you charge the guy $20 million a month for parking, which obviously you couldn't anyway, right? But the point is that with especially a new building, we're able to get creative and minimize or completely eliminate any sort of penalty through the affordability, depending on where we are. So let's talk about the energy efficiency and the accessibility. And for me, at least, I don't like to spend a lot of time on these two components. All you need to know is if you pick from these categories, you have to meet those requirements. And if we go back up to that slide, it says you need to be 40% above code in energy efficiency, or you need to meet, 15% have to meet the B651-18 standard if you want accessibility. Do I know what the B651-18 standard is? No. Do you guys? Probably not. Does it matter? No. And the reason it doesn't matter is because for the exact same reason you hire an engineer to tell you how to build a house and what the foundation needs to look like, if you want to hit those targets, you simply hire the appropriate consultant and they tell you what you need to do, right? Just like you don't ask your architect, why is this wall made out of 2x6s? Or why are these windows this or that? If you need those points, you simply incorporate it into your project. You tell the architect, we need to hit this 15% or 20%, and they will make sure that the consultants spec the building that way, and you'll get a letter for your application to CMHC that meets those requirements. You don't need to know or understand those details at any sort of extreme level. I don't, right? It's not important. In the exact same way I don't know what type of concrete they use when they pour the foundation. I just know they put the concrete. So I don't spend too much time on this, because most of the projects anyways that we talk about in Alberta, which I'll explain in a moment, we don't really need it. But even if we do, and you're designing something like that, it's simply on your architects and consultants to come up with it. It will obviously potentially impact the price of the building, but it's not something that you have to worry about and figure out. You simply target it, and the consultants do it. So we focus, as I mentioned, only on the affordability component when we're talking about Alberta, which we'll explain a little further into this presentation. The energy efficiency and the accessibility do not come into play on the majority of projects that we talk about or look at on a kind of daily basis. So what are the key benefits of the program, right? Why does this make sense? Why are people going crazy and using this so much right now? And why is apartment building construction and multifamily construction, and why are we selling 200 doors in a month? Why is everyone going crazy for this? Because when you add this up, you end up with very good investment opportunities. In my opinion, the best risk-adjusted returns you can probably find, at least within the North American market right now. You're getting those extended AMs up to 50 years. You're going up to 95% loan to cost, which means you only potentially, not only need to, but only potentially need to have 5% equity in the deal. You're getting interest that's far below prime, and you can lock in that money for 10 years, meaning that if you're cash flowing on day one, you can sleep very, very well at night. And people generally, I think, underestimate just how long 10 years is. They really don't think about it. But I can put it in a perspective for you that will make you realize just how amazing getting a 10-year term on your interest rate is. In 2020, 2021, 2019, when the market was crazy and the COVID interest rates were in play, people were locking 10-year rates with CMHC at 1.9% interest. Okay? Obviously that's like dreamy. It's like having a pinup model on your wall. But the most important thing is, what year are we in now? It's 2025. Those borrowers are only halfway through. They still get that unbelievably sexy 1.9% money for another 5 years. What's happened since 2021? Interest rates went up over 7 fucking percent. Were those people awake at night? No, they were sleeping like a baby, counting their sheep or whatever you say, because they still have, even today, interest rates are coming down, and they still have 5 more years on those loans at 1.9%. When you're looking at buying a multiplex, and you're looking at, will I get these kinds of cash flows? Will I be, comfortable and safe? Being able to lock in an interest rate today that you know is cash flowing for the next 10 years is the greatest thing that you can ever do on the face of the earth. And I really hammer on this point, and I really like to use that example because who knows what happens in the next 5 or 10 years? Interest rates will go up to 20%. But if you have a 10-year term, you're pretty well sleeping at night. You know what I mean? So this all comes together to basically guarantee that you're going to end up in a high return and positive cash flow situation. How can we guarantee that? How can we ensure that that happens? Because guaranteeing is a very strong word. And, it's pretty damn hard to say something is pretty much all guaranteed. The answer is because it's not just a trust me bro situation, right? When we look at these things, there's a bunch of requirements that CMHC has. And not only do we have our own underwriters, our own appraisers, and our own mortgage brokers looking at these files, but then it's going to CMHC, and CMHC is reviewing it to make sure this actually makes sense. There's a lot of steps in the chain that are reviewing this stuff, looking at the CMHC benchmarks expenses, looking at their benchmark rents, comparing actual neighborhood rents, real appraisals, all of these things to ensure that the financials of this package really make sense. And when CMHC approves something like this, they want to see a minimum of 110% debt service coverage. What does that mean? It means that debt service coverage is how much more net operating income you have than the cost of servicing the loan, right? So if your loan costs $100 a month, then you need to have $110 of operational income. And your operational income is your rents minus all your expenses, minus your vacancy expectations, bad debt, repairs, reserve fund, everything. So they want to see a minimum that you have at least 10% more income than the operating cost of the building and the debt. Now, any projects we go for are at least 115% or higher, because we like to make sure that there's a much higher safety margin built in. But generally, most of the sites we have are closer to 120 or beyond. But this is kind of our bare bones minimum is 115. The other factor there is that CMHC uses extremely conservative numbers. And when we submit proposals to them, we also have to use conservative numbers. Because if we don't, they're going to give us shit, basically. They're going to kind of push us out the door and say this is not realistic. So it's not just us saying that these packages make sense. You kind of have this third party giving you a sanity check, and you have the underwriters and the appraisers and everyone in the process. This isn't just me sitting in a dark room coming up with numbers off the top of my head. So what it all means is that you would have to have some sort of substantial impact to the markets before you're not able to at least break even on your building, right? I mean, if you do the math here, and you'll see in some of our performance later on, you'd have to be in the neighborhood of 20% vacancies, or 20% lower rents, or 20% higher expenses, maybe even 30% sometimes before you're not able to make a break-even situation on your project. And how can that really happen? Like, when have rents ever dropped 20 or 25% within 6 months or 8 months or a year? It would have to be like World War III kind of situation, right? So, as I like to say, is like, why swim upstream? Leverage government-backed programs to maximize your investments. And for me, this especially kind of hits a key because if you follow me on Instagram, I tend to go on random political rants about how much I hate the government all the time and how much we pay too much taxes and they're screwing us over. And generally, if I think about it, I don't get a lot from the government. Most of the time, most of us don't. The roads are full of potholes. You got to wait 8 hours in an ER to get your broken ankle fixed, right? It takes 2 months to get a passport. Just about the only thing that they have not screwed up is this program. So if you've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes in your life, which I certainly have, you might as well get something back for it. And this is the one time where there's actually an opportunity using a government program to make a lot of money. So take advantage of it, because they're not going to fix the ER wait times anytime soon, right? At least if you make enough money with CMHC, you can go fly to the States when you need a surgery. So the question then becomes is, why isn't everybody doing this? And unfortunately, my hook there where I say that is becoming less relevant, because now everybody is doing this. But when I started doing presentations like this back in the summer, people thought I was totally insane and running some sort of massive scam operation. But the answer is because there's a slight mistake in the alignment of what CMHC wants to accomplish and what they offer. The problem is, what do I mean by alignment? Well, the problem is that you have a lot of people who want to be a landlord, and you have some people who want to be a builder. And for the most part, those two groups do not overlap. Being a builder is not a passive job. Being a landlord is a passive job. The whole reason people want to be a landlord is because it's a way to place your capital in a way that grows and makes you money, and hopefully also makes you some cash flow. Being a builder is a 9-to-5 job minimum. It's probably, for most smaller or mid-sized builders, a 24-hour-a-day job. Not only is it a hard job where you're on site yelling at a bunch of people, probably smoking a pack of cigarettes every day, but it's also a job where if you don't have intrinsic knowledge about the entire construction process, you're going to get absolutely taken advantage of, right? I'm sure some people in this room have tried to be a builder. They've tried to be a developer, and it always looks like this sexy job because you see Tridells and Menkes flying around in private jets, but it's not that easy. Starting from actually finding a piece of land that you know will work for the city's requirements and work for CMHC's requirements, that's hard enough. Then you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on architects, planners, engineers, consultants. The list is ridiculous, okay? I'm building a building at Vic Park in Eglinton right now. You have to hire a consultant for everything, okay? You probably have to hire a consultant to ask how the trees feel. I'm not even kidding. You can't build buildings in this city sometimes because there's an old tree and they don't want you to cut it down, but people are living in a park across the street. You know, it makes a lot of sense. But you have to spend all this money. You have to go through multiple iterations of site plan approvals, designs, applications, and everything has to line up. You have to be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time just to get approval to build the thing. Then you have to make sure that what you got approved to build actually works with CMHC. And then you have to actually build it on budget and on time, which if you're not a builder and don't know what you're doing is not easy. The trades are going to take advantage of you. They can smell blood in the water. The suppliers are going to take advantage of you. And then when you finally build it, and hopefully you didn't screw that up, you have to lease it up, stabilize it, and ongoing manage it. Right? So the problem is that alignment issue. Most people do not want to be a builder. They want to be a landlord. I think if anyone is an investor in this room, the overwhelming majority, I will just make an assumption, would rather be a landlord than a builder. So what is it that we do? Well, we have kind of handled that. We have partnered with trusted builders who have opportunities available, and they handle all of the top end of the things, and then we handle all the bottom end of the things, right? So they have the land. They get it approved with the city. They take all that risk. You don't even know this exists at that point. And the way I like to explain it is, if you think about a Tridel, because everyone knows a Tridel, or a Menkes or a Pemberton, these big builders in Toronto, and you want to buy a condo from them, all you see is the pretty sales center. And you walk in and they have a beautiful floor plan and they tell you it's $500,000 and you say, I want it. When is it ready? And they say 2027. They say, here's your deposits. You give them a few checks. You sign the paperwork. You don't have to do anything else until 2027, where obviously you got to close and blah, blah, blah. But before you ever walked in that beautiful sales center, Tridel might have been working on that for 8 years, right? You didn't see them try to assemble the land and do all the things we talked about, but you don't have to worry about any of that with Tridel because you know that they're just going to deliver you your shiny new clean condo at the end of the day. And whether they made money on that $500,000 or not is not your problem. For all you know, and you see it in the news, lots of builders are losing money right now. But you pay $500,000, and as long as it's a trusted builder, they're going to deliver it and they're not going to screw you on price or cancel the project. Well, we have taken that exact same model and applied it to apartment buildings. Whether that's a 5-plex or a 200-unit building, you do not need to worry about any of these things. All you need to do is know, here's your building, this is the price, and in X months, you're going to get the building. And then we're going to have the property manager lease it up for you, and you're going to take the cash flow. And that's all you have to do. So we have pre-conified this model where you don't have to worry about the costs, you don't have to worry about cost overruns, any of that thing. All that risk is on the builder. You are simply putting in the equity and owning at the end of the day, a multifamily freehold opportunity. So how do you actually qualify for this, right? Because obviously this is kind of getting into the point where I tell you society has kind of lied to you in your life. Because most people probably go, Jake, I can't afford a building. You know, I need millions of dollars to buy something. Even a 5-plex is 1.5 million, an 8-plex is 2.3, 2.4 million. How can I afford that? I don't make enough money. When you get into commercial lending, and this is whether it's with CMHC or whether you do this just through traditional commercial lending, your personal income is irrelevant. They only care about equity because the building is what is supporting the mortgage. That's why they care about the debt service coverage. Remember, we want that 1.1 or higher debt service coverage because they're looking at the asset itself. Can this asset pay for itself? They just want to know that you have the money to put up. And that's the beautiful thing about commercial lending. Nobody who has gotten a few condos or a few houses should continue to buy individual homes because that all comes down on your personal income. And I don't care how much money you make, you're going to cap out eventually, right? If you keep buying individual houses, you're going to run out of personal income. And the banks don't even like lending on personal mortgages more than 3, 4, or 5 of them, no matter how much you make. I'm sure many people here have heard or run into problems where they cannot get another mortgage, even if they actually qualify. So when it comes to commercial lending, and in this case specifically MLI Select lending, all they care about is that equity. They want to see that you have the deposit. Okay? Now we put 5 to 10% of the overall cost because not every deal, despite what you may see on Instagram and some poorly worded and misspelled ads, not every single deal will get to 5% down. There's a lot of factors that come into play there. But all the deals we work on will be between 5 and 10%, 10% being the worst. But they want to see you have that deposit, whatever it may be. They also want to see that you have liquidity, another 10% in liquidity. Now, if the deposit goes up, I don't want to get too in the weeds in a webinar and a session, but you generally just need 15% total between the deposit and the liquidity, right? So there's no real scenario where you need 20. It's more like 5 plus 10, or if it ends up 10, you need an additional 5. But you can count that as 15. Now, I'm going to take a minute and explain liquidity because recently we've had a lot of meetings where people didn't really know what a liquid asset is, right? So liquidity is things that you can make into money the same day, for all intents and purposes, right? So obviously cash is king. Gold is a liquid asset because it's tradable currency in Canada. But again, you'll have to prove you actually have it, and you have to figure that out on your own. Where most people get their liquidity obviously is either cash or lines of credit against homes they own. That's considered 100% liquid. Okay, when you get into stocks and bonds and non-registered trading accounts, they will count it. They will slightly discount it because obviously stocks go up and down every day. So even if you have 100,000 a day, tomorrow it could be 95, right? So they're going to discount that a little bit. Once you get into registered accounts, they're going to discount that very heavily as liquidity. They'll still count it, but you're looking at beyond 50% discounting. The reason being, everyone I'm sure understands, because if you take out your RSPs, you're going to get taxed big time. Right? So generally, we try to avoid people using RRSPs as liquidity unless you just have so much RRSPs that they're going to like laugh. If you have 5 million RRSPs, I don't think anyone's going to question you, right? Overall, they want to see that you have a net worth of about 25% of the project value. Now, there might be people here who fine print me and say it's the total loan value, not the project value. But we just say the project value because everyone here exaggerates a little bit, okay? It's like if you take me fishing and I tell you I catch a fish this big, we all know it's not. So better to just use a little bit bigger numbers, make sure you can meet those requirements, than pushing yourself to the absolute limit. The net worth and the liquidity are inclusive. They're not in addition to. So when you have that 10% in liquid assets, you really only need an additional 15% to top up your net worth. So we can talk in simple numbers. I mean, we don't have any projects that small, but let's just say $1 million, right? You might need $50,000 for the deposit. You need to show another $100,000 in liquid assets and another $150,000 in your net worth. Total net worth is $250K. Now, what I generally find is that most people which have the deposit probably have a matching kind of net worth. And on a big project that needs a $500,000 cash deposit, there's not a lot of people sitting with 500 grand that don't own any assets, right? The only other caveat with this is it has to be in Canadian accounts and Canadian assets. I always say if you have $20 million sitting in a Bank of America account in Detroit, it doesn't matter that it's only across the river. They are going to count it for zero, not even $5, zero. So you have to have these things in Canada. This question comes up all the time. Obviously, people have relatives overseas and that kind of thing. Easy, bring the money here, right? Solve it. If you want to do something with your uncle who's in India or Saudi Arabia or the USA, then as long as the guy trusts you, he just needs to transfer you that money and you can show it as yours. And they're not going to have any issue with that because cash is king. If someone puts $5 million in your bank account, you're going to qualify. But the key element here is your personal income is not a factor. You can do this with literally a 0 on your T1. They do not care as long as you have the equity requirements. So the other element about this that's beautiful is it's really good for small business owners and business owners. I myself have a very, very small T1 filing. It's hilariously small. In fact, I was just refinancing my primary residence and I had actual problems getting the mortgage done with TD. They did it. They don't understand how I pay my mortgage, but it gets paid, right? But the point is, I had problems refinancing my tiny little first mortgage on my principal residence. Meanwhile, I just bought a $7 million CMHC deal. So they do not care. There's no like, oh, this looks crazy. You have $1 million in cash, but you only made $20,000 this year. Does not matter. The building is what's qualifying, full stop. The only other challenges you may have are if you have an extremely low credit score. Even low's not bad. But if it's ridiculously low, you're going to have some explaining to do, or if you owe like back taxes or anything else. But that would be a problem for any type of financing. The key element here is it's literally easier to finance a 5-plex than to buy a condo. And that's what I tell you when I say like most people have been trained wrong on how to buy real estate. Because if I want to buy another condo, I have to prove to the bank I can support it with my own income. They'll count some of the rent, but they're not going to count all of it. When you buy a 5-plex, they don't give a shit what you make. Does the building make money? We finance. And that's all they care about. So overview of this whole program. You have government-backed loans. And very careful because I've seen other people's ads online where they say they're government loans. They are not government loans. They're government-backed. CMHC is a government crown corporation and they provide insurance to lenders to lend. CMHC also does have lending programs of their own, but we're not going to get into that. You can get up to 95% financing of the costs, 50-year loans, up to 10-year terms, and extremely low interest rates below prime. You have a third party kind of giving you a sanity check, and you have, at least the deals we do, fixed price construction. We're doing everything we can to de-risk these deals to make them as safe as possible for an investor to make money. So how can you lose? But there's more. And I learned this one from Steve Jobs. You always got to say there's something more, right? The other amazing thing about the CMHC program, and I think this is where it gets into kind of ridiculous territory, is the Pari-Passu lending element of it, right? So Pari-Passu is a Latin term, and it means side by side or equal footing. Now, Pari-Passu lending with CMHC is kind of unique, because usually what Pari-Passu lending is used for is like really, really big projects where one bank doesn't want the whole loan. Like if they're building like 100, not even 100, like they're building $1 billion office building, like those Heinz buildings, the Bay, the ones that are going across the Gardner there with the park. Like I don't know the financing, but I can almost guarantee you that's done with multiple lenders because no single lender is going to want to take on $1 billion mortgage. It's just too much risk for them. They get like 3 guys in. But the point is it's not that you have a first and a second and a third. They're 3 mortgages that are equal and together, and they all get treated as a first loan. So why does this matter with CMHC? Because the absolute golden standard of how to make money in real estate is through pulling out your equity and buying more when it makes sense. And what Pari-Passu lending does is it allows you to go back to CMHC and back to the lenders in the future and refinance. I mean, there's obviously the assumption that the building's gone up in value or you've paid off a substantial amount of your mortgage, right? You can't refinance if values go down or anything like that. But they allow you to go back to CMHC and do a refinancing where you can theoretically pull out up to 95% of the value. And I want to be very clear because I said loan to cost this whole time. LTC, right? You're building a building, it costs $1 million, and you can get up to 95% financing of the cost. The cost of a building is not necessarily its value. They're 2 different things. Values change every day, right? Today there's a guy who will pay you 1.2 for the building. Tomorrow there's a guy who pays you 950 for the building. But generally buildings and generally real estate over the long run goes up in value. I think we can all agree in most markets over a long enough period of time, real estate goes up in value. So what they allow you to do is go back with new appraisal, new application, and theoretically pull out up to 95% of the value of the building And it's treated, even though it's a second loan, it's treated like an alternate first loan, meaning that it's going to be at the same terms and conditions as your original loan. The only thing that's really going to change potentially is the interest rate, because obviously you're applying at the new interest rates. But it's not going to be like it's at a high interest rate like a normal second. It's still going to be at the advantageous interest rates CMHC offers, but it's going to allow you to refinance without breaking your first loan. And this is where the real wealth gets created, right? Because what it means, first of all, is you can end up owning a building with $0 of your own money in it. In some cases, you can end up owning a building where the building's actually paid you over the long run. But what it really means is that you can build wealth, because what should you go and do with this money? You should definitely not buy a Ferrari or a plane or a boat. You should go and buy more real estate. And this is the part where I think there's a lot of a disconnect into like, what is the purpose of buying real estate? And what I was talking about at the beginning that you guys might have thought, what the hell is this guy talking about? Why would anyone buy real estate to own one house? Or even a 5-plex or an 8-plex? Because yeah, an 8-plex, I'll show you some of them that make like $20,000, $25,000 a year in cash flow. Sounds great. That's still only $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month is not going to put you in business class to fly to Dubai for a month to go get bottle service or whatever kind of crazy shit you want to do, okay? You need, if you, like my point is that if we're here to build wealth, wealth has to substantially alter your life. Unless you build enough of a portfolio of real estate that it literally replaces your primary income, I don't really see the point. So the question is, why is this important? Because the refinancing and the equity takeout is what lets you do that. And if you look at the big private landlords in Toronto or in any place, there's guys in the city that own thousands and thousands of doors. Like one of my clients just picked up 2,000 units in the fourth quarter in Edmonton. In a single quarter, they bought 2,000 doors. Mostly resale, but the point is, how can anyone afford to do that? How did they start? Where did they get all the money to do that? Well, it's not like they were professional athletes making $30 million a year. Some point, maybe a generation ago, they started off by buying a 5-plex or buying a 6-plex or whatever they bought. And probably back then they renovated it, they fixed it up. Back then there was no renoviction issues and all that things, but they did that, they raised its value, they took the money out and they went and bought more, right? And they bought more and they bought more and they bought more. And realistically, anyone in this room who has the requirements to buy a 6-plex or an 8-plex today could very easily have 100 doors within 10 years. As long as things don't go horribly wrong for them in the process. I mean, there's things we can't predict. Events like COVID, World War III, whatever. But you don't even need the markets to be good. You just need not to have a once-in-a-100-year event where things go really wrong for you, and you can very easily use refinancing and equity takeouts to turn 8 or 10 doors into 50 or 100 doors quite easily over a 10-year period. And that's how you actually build wealth. Because once you have 100 doors, you're kind of a player. With 100 doors, you're looking at least, even if you're very leveraged, you're going to be looking at least, I don't know, at least $60,000, $70,000 a month in cash flow. And that's if you're really pushing it. More likely, you'll probably be closer to 100K in cash flow, somewhere in that neighborhood. But the point is, that's different. That's substantial. That's like life-changing money. That's flying business class whenever you want, right? And that's what I'm doing personally. I acquired 42 doors in Edmonton in the last 6 weeks, and I barely used any money to do it. Like, the amount of money I used is ridiculous when I look back. But that's why I ask, what's the purpose of investing in real estate? Because, you know, whether you make a lot of money in your day job or not, no one makes $100,000 a month in their day job. Maybe some people do, but most people shouldn't, because you'll be taxed 50% of it. But like, most people make $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a month. Some top producers out there in the world make $20,000 a month. No one makes $100,000 a month, right? But using a very small deposit and using equity takeouts over a long period of time, where you're not just trying to flip a property and make $5 tomorrow, it is not unrealistic to own 100 doors within your lifetime. Within 10 years, if you're aggressive and things go right for you. But even if not 100, 50 doors in 10 years is a no-brainer if you're buying the right properties. Easily. Because you take out that equity, you can buy immediately another one of those properties, right? And you just keep doing that over and over again. As long as the markets don't go in a very bad direction. They don't even have to go in a good direction. They just have to not go in a bad direction, and you're able to do that. And that's really what I mean by building wealth, or like changing your class in life, or actually getting somewhere. It's not about buying one unit. It's literally like playing the game with cheat codes on. And yeah, people say to me all the time, this seems too good to be true. How can it be? And I go, it is too good to be true. It's government. The government does shit all the time that makes no sense. And I joke when I say that, because this program does make sense based on the needs of the country right now. We have a housing crisis. We need to build houses to put people in. And the funny thing is when you do this, you're actually helping, because you're building good rental homes, right? You're not building shitty little condos in Toronto that are 279 square feet. What family can live in 279 square feet, right? Not only that, you buy the studio in Toronto and you lose $500 a month, versus you buy a sixplex of townhomes or an eightplex of townhomes where the upper units are 1,500 square foot, 3 bedrooms with an actual backyard, with proper livable space for a family. Even the basement unit is 650, 700 square foot, 2 bedroom. That's livable space that families need. You know, up until recently, even detached product could be part of this program, and it may come back. But the point is, you're building actual usable rental stock that people need, and so you make money, and you're actually helping the housing crisis, not just pumping out 7,279 square foot studios that are only appropriate for students or, you know, a 21-year-old finance major. So let's talk about why this works so well in Alberta, because obviously that's my title slide. I'm bullish on Alberta, and I am heavily, heavily focused on Alberta. And I think even with everything going on in the world these days with the US, it's even more the case that Alberta is the place to be right now. The Alberta advantage. Now, I didn't even actually know about this phrase. My amazing Agnes found it for me, but this is a real thing that they actually have trademarked, the government there. And basically it's kind of their motto, their 10-year plan about why Alberta is one kick-ass place. It's the provincial ethos, and I'll read it out loud. It refers to the features that differentiate Alberta from the other Canadian provinces, specifically their efforts to attract private sector investment, reduce red tape for business, and diversify their economy. And when did this kind of start? Well, this started after 2009, when there was the biggest oil crash, you know, when the world financial markets went to shit because of stuff going on in the States. And Alberta has gone through so many of these boom and bust cycles. And they kind of just said, we got to get off oil. Not fully off oil, but we need to diversify our economy a bit. We need to use some of this money and put it into other resources. And that's what they did. They created a business-friendly environment. And I don't think anyone in this room is a socialist. I think we all agree that if you have a business-friendly environment, life is good. So right now, that has blossomed. It's gone absolutely crazy. They've had a 53% surge in tech employment over the last little bit, over the last 5 years. And right now, Northwest Alberta, just outside of Edmonton, is set to have the world's largest AI data center. I'm sure some of you guys have seen it in the news. Kevin O'Leary, love him or hate him, he brought the deal in. He had to fight for that deal because they didn't want to bring that to Canada. But it's a $70 billion data center focused on AI. It will employ over 5,000 people in high-paying jobs. And one of the reasons, well, I skipped ahead of slide, one of the reasons they brought it there, obviously other than a good tax environment, good employment base, low cost of living, and all those things, is running an AI data center takes an absolute butt ton of energy. Where do they have a lot of energy? In Alberta, right? It takes a lot of electricity to power all of the servers that they use that you can ask weird questions to ChatGPT. There's a massive demand for housing in Alberta right now. They have the highest population growth in Canada, 4% on average across the entire province. And the big thing about it that I like is it's record high internal migration. So what you're getting in Alberta right now is not just new immigrants who come to Canada, but you're getting Canadians from across the country who are just fed up with the issues that exist in some of the other big cities. I mean, put it this way. For the same price that you can buy a 1 or a 2 bedroom condo in Toronto, you can buy a very nice family home in either Calgary or Edmonton. So if you have a job in tech, or you have a job where you're not physically required to be there, would you rather live in the crummy little studio, 500 square foot 1 bedroom, or would you rather literally own your own detached home with a backyard? So why Alberta? Why is everyone moving there? Because it makes sense. You know, I was doing a podcast today with Keithika and another agent named Costas, and he really kind of opened my eyes, and like I ramble on sometimes, but it's just about the quality of life. And one way I like to think of it is this, is I remember the 90s here, okay, when I had friends and family who lived in the city, and, you know, they'd work at, like, the Ford assembly plant in Oshawa. And he'd be the only, like, the dad would be the only guy working there, probably making, like, $45,000 a year at the time. And he owned a house, they had 2 cars, and they even could afford a cottage and go on vacation 2 times a year with a stay-at-home mom. And by no means am I telling women they need to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm just trying to say, what happened to that Canada? Because now you have guys making $250,000 a year that can't even afford a semi-detached house in Toronto. So the Canadian dream, in a way, is kind of dead in Toronto, and definitely kind of dead in Vancouver. It should not be the case that people who go to school for 10 years can't afford a house. But in Alberta, a doctor can afford a 50-foot estate home. So why are people moving to Alberta? Because they're fed up. They're fed up with the high cost of living. They're fed up with most of their income being strangled into housing in Ontario. Whether they're a renter or whether they're a buyer, it just doesn't make sense. I personally am currently looking for a new house, and I'm crying over the prices in Toronto. And I do pretty well. And I'm thinking, I literally did the math. This is a total side tangent, but I literally did the math that I could buy myself like a 1-acre estate home in Calgary, and I could budget flying back and forth to Toronto 25 times a year, and I could keep a studio condo in Toronto for when I'm here for work, and it would cost me less than just buying an average kind of house here. Because if you want to, like, I want to live in either the Annex or the Beaches. And if I want to buy a tear-down, like, shitty house in those neighborhoods, you're looking at $2.5 million kind of range. If you want to buy a finished, ready-to-go house, you're into the 3s. Right? So I could buy, for the same money, for $1 million, I could buy a beautiful brand new house in Calgary, and I could fly back and forth. And the carrying costs combined with the taxes, with the flights and everything, would literally be less money. So why Alberta? I think there's a lot of factors, but the number one is because you can afford to live there. People can buy a house in Alberta, and they can still go out to a movie on a Friday night if they want. And not just that, but it's the only option. Because why not Saskatchewan? Why not Regina? Why not Saskatoon? Why not Winnipeg? And the sad answer, no offense to people from there, is those cities are just too small. Right? So you get all of the cost of living benefits in Alberta, in Edmonton and Calgary, but you're still in a metropolitan city that has 1.2 or 1.4 million people. You're not sacrificing your lifestyle. You can still go to concerts. You can still go to the theater, to fancy restaurants. Those options still exist to you that would probably not exist to you in a city of 200,000. So when you put together MLI in Alberta, it becomes absolute solid gold. And I truly believe, it's not a sales pitch, I truly believe that we have a limited time frame on how good this opportunity is from an investor side. Don't get me wrong, there'll be money to be made through MLI in Alberta for decades. But I think in the next year to 2 years is when we have this opportunity for excessive return on investment. And when I say excessive, what I mean by that is generally things get driven down to the risk. Right? Everything is relative to risk. The reason you can make like $1 bajillion in Bitcoin is because it's also very easy for it to go to zero. The reason that a government bond is such a low return is because it's pretty much the safest investment in the world. I think that in Alberta right now, using MLI financing, you can very easily get above risk returns. And that's a limited time thing because people are smart. Every time I do a seminar like this, more of you buy the properties. And when more of you buy the properties, you drive up the profits, or you drive up the costs, right? And when that happens, eventually those excess profits will disappear. That's how markets work. But right now, it is solid gold. There's a bunch of reasons. The first one is the affordability. So earlier in this presentation, I told you we don't really care about energy efficiency. We don't really care about accessibility. And as I said, the median household income is how they determine where they set the rent affordable index. If you use the real numbers for Alberta, it would be give or take over $2,000 a month. But just to perspective where it actually is, Edmonton is at $1,665 and Calgary is at $1,740. To put it in perspective, most areas of Ontario have affordable benchmarks in the $1,200 range. So think about that. We all know how high rents are around the GTA, and to have an affordable benchmark in the $1,200 seems insane. So think about that now when you have to allocate some of your building to being affordable. If you had to do $1,200 a month, you're getting absolutely crushed. This is high. This is crazy high. And when you see what the actual market rents are in Alberta, what you quickly realize is that with proper design of your building, you have no penalty. And that's why we don't have to spend extra money, because if you do accessibility or if you do energy efficiency, obviously higher building code standards cost more money. But if you literally can just rent units at the market price and they're below CMHC's limit, then that's free. You had no actual cost. Your social contract was easy peasy, lemon squeezy, like no problems at all. The other element is the low cost of delivering product. They have no land transfer tax. They have no development charges. There's no municipal hookups. There's no such thing as Section 37's parkland dedication. Wow. It's also the timing, which I didn't get into here, but the average project in Ontario, especially in Toronto, can take years to get approved. Well, time is money. I was sitting in a seminar, I'll never forget this. I was sitting in a seminar maybe 3 years ago with RioCan, was one of the people talking, one of their development managers. And they explained one of their biggest challenges is how long it takes to get a piece of land approved in Toronto. And they estimate that it adds $6 per square foot per month of cost. If it takes 30 months to get a project approved, that's $180 per square foot added to a project that's just made up nothingness because the city of Toronto is filled with Marxists and communists, basically. Like, there's no other logical reason to it. Why on earth, when we have people sleeping in parks, does it take 30 months to approve housing, right? In Alberta, most of these projects in Calgary and Edmonton are approved within 90 days. Raw land to approval is 90 days. Now, it's gotten a slightly longer now because there's been so many applications, but you're still looking at within half a year, even in complicated projects. That substantially reduces your costs, right? And then you add in the fact that you're not wasting all this time and money on these things. How many reports have we seen where 30 to 40% of the cost of a new house in Ontario is taxes and fees? You know what you can't do with the tax and your fees? You cannot rent a tax or a fee. You know what I can rent? Square footage, right? So if 30 or 40% of the cost of your home is not rentable space, then you're so far behind. How are you supposed to catch up to actually make it economically viable? It's wild. And you know, I don't even like to say this is the Alberta advantage. I like to say that we're being abused in Ontario. But that's a political discussion, but these things shouldn't exist. Land transfer tax is a scam. It should not exist. Period. Why is the value of your home tied to registering it in a system that a clerk does in 5 minutes with a keyboard? The other element, and I really don't like how this slide is written, I'm going to get Agnes to change it, is that they write landlord-friendly policies. Because I don't believe the policies in Alberta are landlord-friendly. I believe they are fair and balanced. What we don't have going on in Alberta is people stuck with 8 months unable to evict a tenant who doesn't pay and is literally leaving like rotten food and 17 cats in the air vents and things like that. There is no rent control in Alberta. Never has been. You are legally allowed to carry a security deposit on your tenant, which is illegal in Ontario. You can charge for extras. If someone gets a pet and you said there's no pets in the building, you can evict them. Or you can just say extra $100 a month or whatever you want to charge. If someone moves extra people into the unit, you can evict them or charge them extra money. It's basically like a commercial lease. Whatever you write in the lease, as long as you're not doing something illegal, is valid. And to me, that's not landlord-friendly. That's common sense. The tenant balance with evictions is absolute heaven. It is the best in the country. You can evict a tenant within 14 days if they do not pay their rent. Most evictions I see happen in 9 or 10 days. The sheriff comes, boom, get out. The bailiff or whatever they call them over there. Even if they appeal the eviction, the case is heard and settled within 28 days. There is no sob stories. There is no repayment plans. There's no I lost my job and I need a month. There's no I have mental health issues. None of that. Okay? The only valid appeal is if they actually paid their rent, which is obviously a valid appeal, right? So the only time a case will be ruled in favor of the tenant is if you are a landlord who's literally lying, saying they didn't pay rent and they can prove they paid rent. But other than that, they're out. There's none of the crap we have here in Ontario. You know, I myself own 2 buildings in Ontario. I had a tenant not pay for 15 months and get a 24-month repayment plan without interest. Why? Because they made a sob story. They lost their job. Their kid needs to go to the school. I didn't know I was a bank. I didn't know I was Jake Steinman Financier offering free lending to my tenants, right? That shit does not exist. And I think when we run pro formas and we put 3% bad debt in vacancy or 4% bad debt in vacancy, in Ontario we should be using like 25% bad debt or vacancy because the risk is extreme. One bad tenant can completely fuck everything up. It's to the point where I would not be surprised if in Ontario we're going to see actual like violence happen because there's so many landlords who are so upset and they're losing like their home, they're losing their everything on the verge of bankruptcy that something's going to give. The pot's going to boil over at some point. I think it already happened once, to be honest. But the point is that in Alberta, this doesn't exist. When you put 3% bad debt in vacancy, the guy's out in 14 days. It's not really an issue. So what do you have there is you have the magic formula. You have strict tenant laws. And when I say strict tenant laws, I mean in favor of sanity. You have low delivery costs. You have favorable MI Select financing terms that work well with Alberta, where you don't have penalties on your construction costs. And that just converts to high cash flow, stable investments that you can get with minimal deposits, right? And to me, that's the magic formula. And I think that opportunity is not going to last long. As I said, we have a limited window where this makes a lot of money. Number one, we've already seen CMHC tightening their policies over the last couple months. I'm probably responsible for some of that because I've made quite a bit of noise. But literally, we see CMHC tightening all the time. They're kind of funny. You know, as good as a government program can be, they go, let's make this kick-ass program. And then when everyone starts using it, they go, holy shit, too many people are using this program. Even though I think probably 7 or 8% of the entire GDP of the country is now CMHC MLI Select, they have been tightening it, okay? They've been increasing the liquidity requirements. They've been much tighter on construction budgets and equity takeouts and all these other things. There was an increase a few weeks ago in the spreads that lenders were charging over the bond rates because there was just so many people applying, they realized they could charge more money and make more money. And even now, we just saw that a couple weeks ago, they started denying detached home product, which is a whole other story. Thousands of applications approved. Arbitrarily, they said, we're not doing detached homes anymore. So we are definitely in a period where we might as well enjoy the good while it's here, because I think within a year or 2 years, these 5% deals will not exist anymore. They'll probably push it to 10% down, minimum. We've already seen they added holdbacks on construction loans. They're just tightening to de-risk, because I get it. Giving out billions of dollars with only 5% deposits could be seen as a risk on not an individual buyer, but on a macro scale for the whole country, right? So my thing is, how long will this exist? We don't know. And it's not me making a sales pitch. I'm just telling you, if you blink on this one and you say, I'll wait 6 months or a year, these deals may not exist. And I want to be very clear. Once you are approved, once you have your financing in place, I'm not saying that will take it away. There's been versions of this program going back to the 60s, and there's people whose loans are in year 35 of a 50-year term, and they're still getting the terms they had way back then. So they're not going to take away what you have if you get an approval today. But there might not be an approval for you tomorrow. And that's why I'm buying as many of these as I can while the going's good, right? Because I don't believe this will last way longer than maybe a year or two. And the other factor is that as prices rise, obviously as investors move in, prices rise. There will come a point where it no longer is as economically viable to invest in these projects. Because at the end of the day, we want the cash flow. We want to see that we're covering the mortgage and making a reasonable amount of money in our pocket every month. And obviously, if prices go up, mortgage size increases, cash flows decrease. We've already seen this happen in Calgary. Calgary has been the hot thing since like 2021. And prices there now do not make sense to me on a lot of projects. You'll see a lot of guys out there pumping a lot of Calgary projects. I'd say 95% of what we do is in Edmonton, because I cannot make the deals in Calgary paper properly except for the very rare deals. Most people are overpaying in Calgary. They're being, I don't want to say lied to, but maybe the agent or the people involved in those deals doesn't know what they're doing, and they're promising things that will not happen. They're never going to hit 5% down. Whereas I have deals in Edmonton that are 5% down all day because the numbers still work. The prices have not risen to a point where they can't support it. But writing's on the wall. Within a year or two, I don't think you'll be able to find deals at those rates anymore. Yeah, don't risk missing out. I don't know. I talk, I don't push the slide button. So as I say, you can sink or you can swim, you can adapt or you can die. If you're a realtor in this room and you aren't selling MLI and you're still hoping you can sell a pre-con, good luck. I've sold 0 pre-con this year. I think we only sold 4 pre-construction condos last year. To put in perspective, in 2021 we sold about 600 units. And if you're an investor in this room and you still want to buy pre-construction, good luck, and I love all the pre-construction builders, and pre-construction is an important part of building new homes in Ontario, but the numbers don't make sense today, right? Who wants to pay $1,400 or $1,500 a foot for a 400 square foot unit in downtown Toronto? You're going to be losing $200, $300, $400, $500, $600, maybe $1,000 a month. For what? It's not going up in value right now. So you can adapt or you can die. And commercial lending and taking advantage of the government giving us the best loan program probably on the planet, because the US has a similar program, but it only goes to 10% down, is adapting. So let's look at an example of a project. These are sold out. I had 6 of these little 5-plexes, but I use it because, why do I use these little 5-plexes in my examples? Because I want to show people how easy the entry point can be on these deals. Now, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think 5 or 6-plexes are the best investments. They're not bad, but obviously like anything else, there's economies of scale. A couple factors that come into play is you will definitely have fixed ongoing costs on a yearly basis. Like you have to pay your accountant, you might have bank fees, all these other things that just exist with running a business. And the cash flows on a 5-plex are just so relatively small that a lot of your costs get eaten up by those fixed. Whereas when you get into an 8 or a 10-plex, you're going to have a much lower ratio of those fixed costs. The other element is that generally lenders do not like the really small deals as much because it's the same amount of work for them to do the paperwork on $1 million as $100 million. If they're only making about 0.8% interest off of that mortgage on $1 million, it's not a lot of money for them to make in a year to administer that loan, right? To deal with it if you have problems sending out emails and real paper letters and stuff. So what we see is on really small deals, your interest rate's going to be a little bit higher. And then, of course, your fixed costs that you have, whether you own a 1-unit building or a 10 million unit building, are going to take up a bigger chunk. But the point is that to get your foot in the door, these are numbers that even like a 25-year-old kid who saved up can get into, right? So we have these 5-plexes in Keswick, not Ontario, Keswick, Edmonton, 1.455 million. What we do is, you're probably wondering what these roll-ins of fees are. Just to explain, when you get into commercial lending, you as the buyer pay all of the associated fees. When you are buying a personal home, there's a lot of fees, but the bank just kind of hides them and eats them. They roll it into their costs, right? You don't see it. But in commercial lending, you pay your mortgage broker, you pay the bank's fees, you pay the bank's lawyer on closing. It's all on you because they're saying, okay, we're giving you the loan. This is commercial. It's your cost. You get to write it all off down the road. What we do, since you're getting up to 95% financing, is we include it in the price. That way, you're basically financing those fees as opposed to coming up with extra costs, because those fees could amount up to, not always, but up to around 2.5% of the loan, which could be substantial, because if you're only putting 5% down, then really now you're at 7.5%. So by rolling them in, we're keeping you back at that 5%, right? And as long as the project cash flows well, why would you want to pay that out of pocket when you can have your renters paying it for you? So some of our projects, it's done as a closing adjustment. Other projects, the builder will actually just pay it for you, right? So if it's a closing adjustment, you're paying it out of your pocket, and then it's coming off on closing. If the builder's paying it for you, then you don't have to do anything. Not every builder wants to do that because it's their own money. Regardless, we have our rents, and I think we got to buy a newer projector, but basically we use relatively conservative rents. And what I mean by that is we have a 3-bedroom upper unit here. This product here is a duplex, so like a semi-detached home, legal basements, and 1 garden suite. Some of the ones we would have 2 garden suites because the lots can fit it. This lot can only hold 1 garden suite, so you end up with 5 doors. We have a 3-bedroom and a 4-bedroom upper. It's not a symmetrical semi-detached home. What we will see in the real markets, and I have leases on our Google Drive signed over the last couple months, is that on a mid-sized 3-bedroom upper, I believe this one's about 1,500 square feet, we can get around $2,600 per month. We use CMHC's numbers of around $2,300. Depending on the area, we'll put between 22 and 24. On a 4-bedroom, we can probably get $2,800. We're putting 25. 2-bed basement, $1,300. Probably can get $1,450. Have leases. And the garden suite, $1,500 is about on point. as real kind of rent numbers. So the first thing you'll notice is 3 of our units are below the affordable, right? So out of 5 units, you only need 25% to be affordable. That's like 1.5 units. You're doing that with the market rents. You don't have any cost or penalty, right? And that's why these projects work in Alberta, whereas in Ontario, this would not work at all. You'd be shit out of luck in most parts of Ontario. Second thing is, as I mentioned, we're using relatively conservative rents. Now, the fees and the expenses are all either a real-world example or they're CMHC benchmarks, right? They just give us percentages of rent, or they say, you know, in this area, I've charged this much per door, that kind of thing. Generally, in real life, you're going to have lower expenses. But better that we provide the worst case scenario and it turns out better than the opposite, right? Management and salaries, we have a standing contract for all of our small projects with a very good property manager out there who basically says this is the price they will charge, which is 5.25% plus $500 per door per year. By no means are you obligated to use that property manager, but we've done the work of finding a good rate that you can use kind of, if you want to do your own research and interview 30 property management companies, go for it, right? But we've given a rate that is below market because a lot of property managers out there will charge between 7 and 8%. And we get that because we tell them we're going to give them a shitload of clients every year, right? And correct. There's a few items on here that we put in because it's how you do a proper pro forma, and there's some items in here that are expensed out because CMHC wants to see it that you really will not have in your first 5 years. And a lot of people like to churn their capital within 5 years. Those 2 items would be the repairs and maintenance and the replacement reserve. So replacement reserve is your long-term savings account for future major capital work, right? If you own this thing for 30 years, you're going to have to put a new roof, new windows, new doors, change a boiler or HVAC system, whatever. You're supposed to be saving that money up, investing it in safe things like bonds and GICs, and then, you know, in 25 years, that $1,500 a year has grown to be 40 grand or 30 grand, and you can replace the roof. Well, if most people are churning their capital in 5, 10 years, you don't really need to worry about a replacement reserve if you're planning to sell the building. When you sell that building, the new buyer is going to take the value and depreciate how much is left on the roof and everything else to come to a final price. So unless you're planning to own it for 30 or 40 years, maybe you are, you don't need to worry about that $1,500, right? But even when you are, that's not actually an expense. It's money you're saving. It's still cash flow in your pocket. It's just money you're not going to use to go out partying for the weekend. Repairs and maintenance in a brand new building in Alberta should be 0. Reason is because, 1, if it's a building defect, it's under warranty. You have a 10-year Alberta new home warranty, similar to Tarion in Ontario. You get decreasing coverage over the years, but at least in your first year, it's bumper to bumper, right? And by year 10, it's like your foundation. But the other side of it is if your tenant damages anything, what do you have in Alberta that you don't have in Ontario? You have security deposits. So the most interesting thing is, crazy how economics work, when you have security deposits, people tend not to break stuff. Crazy, huh? It's wild. But even if they do, you're holding their cash. The single biggest repair and maintenance I have in my buildings in Ontario is unit turnover. Usually it's just they don't keep the place clean. They don't fill the holes in the wall from their pictures. So you got to get a drywall guy and a painter in, and you got to hire a cleaner, $500, right? But if you have a bunch of units, that adds up in a year. Guess who leaves their homes clean? Guess who fills the drywall? Because you have a security deposit. And if they don't, you just deduct the $500. So really, you have 0 repairs and maintenance in a new building in Alberta. CMHC wants to see it, right? So if you wanted to say, you could probably pump this up to around 15 or 16,000. Now you might be going, Jake, it's $1.5 million and I'm only making $13,000. But look at your deposit, 75 grand. You're buying 5 doors, you're getting into multiplex, you're becoming an actual landlord, running an actual business with the price of a fully loaded Honda Accord. Your cash-on-cash returns are 17.5%. Can anyone here show me where else you can get that? Even private lending, the worst private lending, like the lending where you feel gross at night for giving them the money because you know they're about to lose their house and basically get a divorce and have their life destroyed, is not at 17.5%, okay? And the other thing is when you lend on that money, if you're at like 15% private lending, you're like 90% loan to value, and you don't own the asset. And there's a good chance you'll never recover that money if they default. You're getting 17+% cash-on-cash returns, and you own the asset. You're still paying off the mortgage every month. You're getting principal back.
and you're getting any appreciation that may exist, right? And here you'll see again that our debt service coverage rate is almost 120, meaning that we'd have to be very, very, very wrong, or the market would have to substantially change before you're not at least able to break even, which we analyze. Because if I go to the second page here, and I'll get into the projections and stuff in a moment, but here we can take a look at what happens if either rates change or if the rents change, right? And what you'll see is, number one, even at negative 15% rents, you're just about breaking even on the building. But I'd also caution you to take a look at the fact that this building is, in its first year, paying off around $9,000 of its mortgage. So even in a situation where you're losing $100 a month, you're negative $1,200, you've actually still come out ahead. You would have to be down about another 5%, where you'd have to be at the point where you're negative $9,000 a year in cash flow before you're actually not above break even when you factor in your principal recapture. Right? And considering that we're using, in my opinion, conservative rent numbers, it's really worse than that. The other side of it is the interest rates. Now, we paper these at 4%. We have our own lender for small projects. So the big lenders out there for CMHC are typically like Peak Hill, Green Birch, ICI, a couple others. The problem, as I mentioned, we ran into is they don't really like to touch these small loans anymore because there's enough guys applying on bigger loans. So we actually went out and approached some guys that have a lot of money, and they got their own approval from CMHC to lend, and they gave us a mandate that they will not worry about the size of the loan, and they will honor at most 95 basis points over the bond rates for all of our lending, which makes us, like, I don't want to flex, but kind of like the only guys that can really confidently sell these fiveplexes and ensure our clients are not going to get totally screwed. Because if you went to like an ICI right now or a Green Birch and tried to get this funded, they're going to be probably at 1.5 to maybe 1.8% above the bonds, right? And the CMB, I wasn't checking today, but yesterday it was at like it dipped into the twos. It was like 2.97 or 2.96. So if you're 0.9 above that, you're actually at like 3.8%, 3.85 interest, right? Whereas if you were at an ICI or a Green Birch, something like that, and maybe I'm in the weeds here, you'd be well into the 4.5s. So we've made sure we protect our clients by ensuring we can give them lower interest rates than they can get on these small deals. Now, on big deals, it makes no difference. But on small deals, we've ensured we can sell these with confidence. But even then, even if the rates were up at 4.5, you're still above the minimum for CMHC, and you're still well into positive cash flow. And if things go the other way, 3.5, look at that. Suddenly you're cash flowing $20,000 a year off of a fiveplex that you only invested 75 grand into. And I can tell you right now, bonds have been dropping. The more Trump opens his mouth, the better. Okay? Bonds touched the 2.5s on Monday, and then unfortunately they made a deal. I wish they didn't make a deal because I have 2 applications in right now. I was hoping this shit would have kept going because bonds and the Canadian dollar were going through the floor, but they recovered a bit, but now they've still come down a lot, and they probably will still continue to come down because the economy is weak, the bank is cutting rates. The fact is that we're lending below 4 right now, right? It only gets better and better. But now let's look at the projections, and I know this is long and I talk a lot, but I don't even care about 2, 3, 4, and 5 years, and I think it's silly to even have those. We need to have them because everyone puts those in every type of investment package. But how can anyone predict 5 years out? I mean, 5 years ago was COVID, right? 5 years ago, suddenly we could walk into a restaurant wearing a mask, but then we sat down, we didn't need the mask. It made no sense, okay? I remember getting yelled at on an airplane for taking too long to drink my drink. But what I can tell you is about the first year. I have a 10% increase in value in there. You might go, how can I say there's a 10% increase in value? Because any of the projects we do, we protect the buyer's interest. And if you're buying something pre-construction, there has to be a reason. The reason is because we ensure there's equity. So if we go back to the very beginning, you get up to 95% loan to cost. And as I said, cost is not value. Any project that we take on, the total deliver cost to you, minimum, has to be 10% below the appraised value or we won't sell it. And the reason we know it will be 10% below is because we run everything by our appraiser before we ever put it up there for anyone, right? So these sixplexes are actually appraising at 1.64. So they're getting more than 10%. They're up 200K, give or take, just under 200K, $185,000 for $75,000 in. They've kind of almost 2.5 times their value, right? When we sell resale, if you want to go find a apartment building resale, you're generally buying it at or close to the appraised value. No one's going to give you 10 or 15% below the appraised value. Why would they? But in a resale building, you have zero risk. If literally those are the tenants, that's the expenses, you know exactly how much cash flow it's going to make to the penny. Do I know that this building will make exactly this, $12,951 and 17 cents? Of course not. It might make 18 cents, right? But the point is, it's going to be in that range. So what are you getting for taking on the I trust Jake and his team is that you're getting that uplift in the appraisal on day one. So every project we sell minimum has 10% lift. A lot of them have more. We find some deals that are crazy sometimes. A lot of the really, really crazy ones, I'll just buy or keep the good buys. But we find a lot of deals that are very, very good. But even just forget about that, right? If you just look at that cash flow or 12,000, call it 13,000 and 9,000, you're talking about a cash flow of 13,000, you're talking about a principal recapture of another 9,000. That's $22,000 a year on a $75,000 investment. What is that, like 30%? Without any appreciation. Because in Ontario, we've been trained you need appreciation. You buy a condo, whether it's pre-con or new, you lose money every month, but it's okay because it goes up in value. Well, that didn't work out so well when things stopped going up, right? And whether we thought things were going to stop going up in 2022 or 2020, or some people said, YOLO, it'll be 2028, it doesn't matter. It couldn't go up forever. I mean, if it went up forever, then a house would be $1 billion in a few years because that's how exponential increases work. But what can be forever is cash flow. Whether the rents go up 5% or down 5% in a year doesn't really matter. Because unless there's a world-altering event that caused rents to drop 25 or 30%, you're at least going to break even. And if you had 3 years in a row where you made positive cash flow and then somehow rents dropped a lot in the fourth year, you've still come out ahead overall on those 3 or 4 years. If the building goes up in value, it's extra juice. It's amazing. It's great. Because even if it doesn't, you're paying down the mortgage, and you can pull that equity out eventually with Pari-Passu. If it goes up in value, you can pull it out even sooner. But what you do have is that for the next 10 years, short of a nuclear war or COVID 2.0, you can sleep well at night because your interest rate is locked, and the cash flows will keep coming in. So cash flow is king is the expression, right? And that's why these buildings are such a good offering. I mean, nothing can be zero risk. No one can control what happens in the market tomorrow. There's lots of uncertainty out there with the U.S. But I think it's much safer overall if you have a substantially cash flow positive building paying you a little bit of money every month than trying to hope and pray that some investment here goes up $200,000 after a few years and you can exit it after losing money every month. And even if values drop, who cares? Rents go down 5%, buildings worth 5% less. Who cares? You're still making $8,000 a year, and you're not selling it tomorrow, so what do you care? And if you already got your equity out, who cares? It doesn't matter if the value tomorrow is lower. Real estate is a long game. Values go up and down, but over the long run, they go up, right? The worst year in real estate was 1989. People got absolutely hammered. But even those people who bought at the very peak of 1989, if they still own that real estate today, they're still done great, right? So at the end of the day, this is the way to make money. And the fact of the matter is that there is nowhere else I can think of on earth that's not short of some sort of crazy risk where you can make 17% return on your cash while you own the asset and pay down the mortgage. And that's it. I mean, I don't think there's anything else. I put an ad here that I saw on Instagram today. I hid who was running the ad, but I caution you that this ad is filled with all kinds of bullshit. So I posted it because be very careful. I now see so many ads on MLI and Instagram, and a lot of them are lying to you or not saying the whole story. Let's look at this for a few minutes here, just so that you guys can keep your wits about you, whether you buy real estate from me or not. I don't want anyone getting screwed. Number one, they spelled amortization wrong. And I find that shocking, because usually you would spell check things, okay? Here's the most amazing part, though. They wrote 2.8 to 3.5% interest rates. Now, I don't understand where on earth they got these numbers from. My guess is they got confused because the CMHC premium just like is 2.8%, right? Like they charge an insurance premium because insured lending, just like I'm sure some of you have done on your own personal loans. It's 2.8%. And I wonder if these people thought that 2.8% was the interest rate. but it's the insurance premium you pay. The reason I think that too is because there's other insurance programs with CMHC that can be 3.5. So it sounds to me like they literally Googled CMHC and just stole those premiums. But my concern would be for you to buy, if you're buying from someone who doesn't know the difference between an interest rate and an insurance premium, what else don't they know, right? The other things wrong here, only 5% down payments. I've been very cautious this whole time to tell you that it can be as low as 5% down payment. If anyone tells you on any project, even my projects, that it is only 5% down, they are lying to you. CMHC is still an adjudicated program. It's like being in small claims court or like the Human Rights Tribunal. Okay? If the adjudicator you get that day has gotten in a fight with their husband or their wife, they might give you 93% loan to value just because they can. There is no explanation and no requirement for them to justify it. Even if your project makes the most insane cash flows that it easily qualifies, they can just arbitrarily tell you we're not doing 95 on the deal. And you can appeal it, and there's ways to hopefully get it back to 95, but no one can guarantee you 95% down. Unless, or 95% loan to value, unless the builder is like saying they'll reduce the price if it comes up short. And I don't know any builder that's going to do that. Okay? And then the final piece is that it's a new program financed by the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada is not lending money to people, and this program is not new. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to shit on someone else's ads, but what I'm trying to say is, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because people have approached me saying, the incentives you offer or your deals, they don't look as good as other people's deals. Because I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you the truth about what is realistic and what you actually get. Right? So if you choose to believe things like this, proceed with caution. But all I'm telling you is no one on this planet can guarantee you that it's 5% down. No one on this planet can get you 2.8% interest. This program is not new. The Government of Canada does not do the lending. So proceed with caution. Ask hard questions of people and make sure they actually know what they're talking about. Ask them who's doing the financing, who's doing the brokering, who's their underwriter, who's their appraiser. Make sure they actually understand the steps involved in the deal. Because you're putting deposits down and you need to hope that this thing can actually get approved at the ratios you want, right? Every single deal we've ever submitted has been approved, obviously as high as 95%. The worst deals we've ever done have come in at 90%. We've never had a deal below 90%. Most of our deals are either at 95, 94, 93. And I tell people, if you're buying an apartment building, you need to be ready for 10% down. Everything you get above that is gravy. And we qualify all our buyers that they have at least, I mean, obviously the requirements are the requirements that I showed before, but we ensure they always have at least the money to close if needed, and they can always get the rents in and refinance to pull out that equity. But where else on earth can you own a multiplex building with as little as 10%, right? And when you get 5%, you should be inviting me to your kid's wedding and stuff, right? And most of our deals, to reiterate, will hit 5%, but I will not guarantee that. And if someone is not comfortable closing at 10, they should not buy. And when you get 7% or 6%, you should not complain. Because if you get 6% down, what do you have to complain about, right? Couple other points, not about this ad specifically, is some people will ask, can you have commercial in these buildings? The answer is yes, because obviously there's lots of areas where you have to have a commercial component for zoning. You can have up to a certain percentage by floor space and by revenue being commercial. If you have commercial, though, they're going to blend the rates between the two. They're going to count it as two different mortgages. The commercial is going to be loaned at much more traditional lending rates, like 60 to 70% loan to value. So depending on the square footage, that's going to impact your overall rate. I see lots of commercial deals around 85 to 90% down. Even though the residential will be at 95, if the commercial is at 70, it averages out to 85. Okay? What other questions might there be? I don't know. That's probably the big one. Do not buy any detached homes from anyone right now. There are guys out there, I know one big company who's hawking a lot of detached MLI product. They will not approve it. Okay, since January 17th, they threw a wrench in our gears. We've been waiting on a decision from them. I am talking with all three of the lenders, CMLS, ICI, Greenbirch. They have been in closed-door meetings with CMHC for the last 3 weeks because they're basically saying this is bullshit. It doesn't make any fucking sense. What the hell are you guys doing? And not just that, but they have literally billions of dollars of loans in jeopardy that were already applied for when CMHC arbitrarily made a rule change on the 17th of January with no notice and no actual justification. We are hopeful that they will allow detached again, or at least grandfather in the existing applications. But if anyone is trying to sell you a detached product right now, they are not acting in your interest because they have no path forward to approval at the moment. We have detached product sitting unreleased, and if we get a decision from CMHC that they're going to allow it again, it'll be out and available. But if they don't, why would I sell it to you and fuck you over? Literally a detached house with like a legal basement and a garden suite. So previously, we could sell detached products, say 5 lots. You have upstairs, downstairs, that's 10 homes, or 10 doors, right? Or maybe there's a garden suite and you're getting 3 doors per lot, 3 lots, 9 plex, or something like that. On January 17th, near the end of the day, which was a Friday, ruling came in, no more detached. Just arbitrary. CMHC just said, we don't think it's the spirit of the program, which I don't truly understand, because if the point is to get rental housing built, don't some people need to rent detached houses? Like, why would you allow a townhouse but not a detached home? Don't families want to rent detached homes? Anyway, I'm not here to debate the policy. I'm just telling you that if you are talking to other people who are offering detached product right now, ask them this question. Yeah, so, oh, do we have online questions? Okay, we'll do the online questions, and then we'll do the in-person questions, and then I'll let you all go home since, like, how late is it? I keep going and going and going. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, what are the questions?
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, Jazz Beer, for joining in and listening. Jacob's question is, when are these buildings getting built, and who is holding your money? Is it in trust or under a company name of the builder?
Sure. So when are they being built? Every project we offer, we show the timelines on them. Generally, small projects. And when I say small projects, I'm talking about now basically just stacked towns or townhome projects, because obviously there's no more detached. But detached would have been included here, are usually under 12 months. Most of them are going to be between 6 and 10 months. Some stragglers take a little longer. Maybe they have issues with timing and that sort of thing. But generally, small projects are under 12, most of them 6 to 10. Big projects, and when I say big projects is when I'm talking about a true multifamily apartment building, like a 5-story or 6-story building, elevators, stairs, amenity spaces, those are generally 24 to 30 months timelines. You might be asking, why don't we build apartment buildings that are 8 or 9 units? It's because you lose so much space on the shared spaces, it doesn't make sense economically until you get to around 40 or 50 doors to actually build an apartment building. Because townhouses, every square foot is rentable space. When you build a building, you have an efficiency factor. You have hallways, stairways, elevators, amenity spaces that are all non-revenue spaces.
Parman asked, when buying a second CMHC property, would a CMHC MLI select property you already own add into your net worth as well?
Yeah.
That's the beauty.
Anything you own is part of your net worth.
A lot of people are asking for investor decks. If you put your email in the chat, I'll email that to you. Once approved and you find another deal with a different builder, can you use the same approval from a different broker to a different builder?
So 2 parts of that question, I think. Number 1, no. The same approval, no, because the approval is based on the project itself. So just to clarify, because that question might have been worded weirdly, the approval is based off of you as the borrower having the equity requirements, and then it's based off, does this project paper properly for CMHC? So you cannot take a COI, like a certificate of insurance, from one project to another. If the question was, can you switch the builder on the same project, the answer is sort of. And that's a more complicated question, because part of the approval is who is the builder and what's their resume. So that's a question I actually don't have a full answer to, but it would definitely involve going back to the lender and CMHC to confirm with them they're okay with switching the contractor. Whether they would require a full reapproval or not, I don't actually know.
Okay. What is the cap rate in the areas these are being built in?
The resale cap rates would be in the high 4s to low 5s, and then what most of the projects we're offering are going to be in the mid 5s to low 6s.
Okay, so we talked about the regulation changes with detached. Someone's asking about semi-detached and separate titles.
We're not 100% clear on semis. It's a beautiful world CMHC lives us in. So we actually have a whole bunch of semis that were sold, and we're just waiting on clarity before we submit them. We are about 85% sure it will be okay, but why submit the application until we know with absolute certainty? Luckily, we work with amazing builders, and all of them are patiently waiting with us. They're not pushing the issue on the buyers. They're not pushing the issue on us. They're happy to wait and see the outcome, because they, like us and the buyer, what's the point of firming up a deal and starting the process if there's no way to actually get the financing? So everyone's kind of in the same boat on these. Oh, okay. Any questions? Here.
All right. Okay. What's your question?
The appraisal and the reappraisal, are they based on NOI or is it based on?
Is appraisal and reappraisal based on NOI?
Yeah, it's commercial lending, so it's all about the net operating income and then obviously depreciating the age of the building and some comp related stuff, but generally it's all net operating income.
For evaluating the net worth, somebody's looking to buy a property a little bit higher in price, and the net worth for that individual may not be there. Can two people or three people combine, and their net worth equivalent, like somebody may have a 2 million net worth, the other person may have another 2 million. Will that be considered 4 million then?
Okay, so how does qualifying come together when it's multiple parties and net worth?
Sure. So yeah, there's exactly what you suggested is you can combine people to add up whatever elements you need of the net worth or the liquidity or the deposit. CMHC allows up to 100 individuals on an application. Do not come to me with 100 individuals on an application because that will be an absolute nightmare. But they do not speak to the structure either. So if you want to have one guy be 99% and the other guy contributes 1%, that's up to you guys. But essentially, they will allow you to combine and add it any way you want. Often you'll see one guy's got a lot of cash, one guy's got a lot of net worth, and you can create the perfect partnership.
I didn't know it was 100. That's kind of wild. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so it depends on the project. They're all held in trust. Some of them are held in builder's trust account if it's a freehold, and if it's more like a multiplex building, then it would be held in lawyer's trust. But either way, they're in trust and they're insured by the Alberta New Home Warranty Program. So one other note in Alberta is there's multiple warranty programs and insurance programs out there. It's not like here where there's just Tarion. We only work with builders who are Alberta New Home Warranty. It's a bit more Wild West out there, and if a builder is not Alberta New Home Warranty, I highly recommend not working with them because they're like the gold standard and the other ones are like the fly-by-night operations.
Okay. All right, I'll go here.
So we're buying projects that are 12 to 16 months out. When we're giving initial deposit, 5% within 10 days, right? We're not actually submitting the application to CMHC, getting proper LOI or the conditional approval or the actual approval. How do we protect our client's capital or our own capital, the first 5% or 7%, whatever it is? To until that time when that application actually gets submitted and we get the approval. Because the regulations can change on the townhouses and the detaches as they call over their duplexes. What do we know for sure?
Okay, so I think the question, there's a few things. Process, so depending on the process, it could be 6 to 10 months. The larger process, 12 to 24 months. And then, Jake, maybe you can add in about the safety of the deposit of our purchasers.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I think the question was around, I didn't touch on this, but if you get a COI, it's only valid for 6 months. It has to be used within 6 months. So when you get a CMHC approval today, you have to use it within the next 6 months, or else you literally have to start a brand new application. They don't do extensions or anything like that. So on most of our small projects, the timing works out really well, because if we know a delivery is going to be in 6 to 8 months, or it's going to be 10 months, by the time we get through the application itself, we're right in the proper window to just submit it, that it'll be ready for closing, right? For bigger projects, they're typically done as construction loans. And so I didn't touch on this because, again, I didn't want to get super into the weeds, but CMHC has 3 parts of this lending. They have land, construction, and the actual mortgage, right? Generally, on most of our smaller projects, we just do the mortgage because it's not worth the headache of all the CMHC paperwork for a builder to use that construction loan. On big projects that have much longer time frames, we almost always use the construction lending, which means we're applying right away and activating the loan right away. So generally, these things kind of avoid the risk, and we don't have a lot of deals where the closing is way further out than when you'd want to apply on day one, right? Can I guarantee that they never change this program during the application? Unfortunately, no, because CMHC is a bit of a wild card and they're changing stuff all the time. Usually, they announce a sunset date on their current set of rules. They don't normally just arbitrarily change things on a Friday at 3 p.m. In fact, that's literally never happened before. Like, even in the summer when they made a change to their application system, they gave a 90-day window. right? So you can plan around that however necessary. It was an extremely weird case with the detached homes. Again, I can't say for sure, but I don't think we'll see an issue like that where they just arbitrarily make changes. Their past track record has always been to provide like a 90-day warning when they're going to make changes to the program, similar to how like the cities do when they're going to change their planning policies. They don't do it that day because they know you're applying, right? So for small projects, you're usually submitting within the first couple of months anyway, or right away. And for large projects, you're submitting right away because the whole construction loan is dependent on that CMHC financing. So nothing can be risk-free. If you want risk-free, you go get a government bond. But generally, it's very de-risked because you're either submitting right away and you're in the queue, or it's a construction loan and then you're opening the loan right away. So it depends, because the approval process can take up to 90 to 120 days on smaller projects. If you are a builder, would you want to leave your inventory sitting open for 120 days? Generally, no. That's why we're pre-underwriting everything and making sure it works with huge margins. And it's not just me hoping for it. It's our brokers and everyone else in the chain. They don't want to submit anything to CMHC that's not going to get approved. CMHC is incredibly strict with shitty applications. They will ban you, not by corporation, but by your personal name, if you start submitting crap that doesn't get approved, right? If your rents are too high, your prices are too high, your construction budgets are like a rip-off, things like that, very quickly you will get banned and not be able to submit any more applications. So we have our own vested interest in not submitting non-approved sites. We will not generally, on big projects, absolutely, it will be conditional on that approval. Small projects generally are non-conditional on the approval because it's already been underwritten. We already know it's going to paper. And CMHC does not arbitrarily deny an application. The only valid reason for denial is that you don't meet the liquidity requirements or you don't have the net worth and all those other things. And if you're doing that, you're just totally insane because you've already pre-qualified with our brokers to make sure you meet them. So that would mean you were just straight up lying to the broker about your qualification. What value does that get you? Like, you're not going to trick them into giving you it when they check your bank statements and stuff, right? So CMHC, like, I want to reiterate, there's no arbitrary denial. They're not going to look at an application and be like, nope, we're not approving it. If the deal papers, it papers. Maybe you don't get your 95, but you get your 93 or your 92. We even had a deal in Sylvan Lake that got approved at 60%. And the reason is because CMHC uses a 5-year average vacancy rate, and Sylvan Lake used to be a complete shithole with absolutely ridiculous vacancies, like 35%. And they look at that 5-year average, and they would only lend 60%. Now, it wasn't a big deal. We knew it was going to come in low. We thought it would be like 75 or something. So 60 was a little bit of a gut punch. But my point is, they don't not approve it. They still did the loan just at 60%, right? So like our worst case is hitting 90-10 because these things are so well papered that if you put those deals, the Keswick deal at 10% down, it's at like 40% cash flow. So like they can't say no. The only reason would be is if the buyer literally doesn't meet the equity requirements, and they'd have to be kind of suicidal to do that. It's like I can't help someone if they don't have the equity, right? I was talking with our broker who's done about $3 billion of CMHC loans, and in all of those deals, I think it's like 500 transactions, he's only had 2 disapprovals. And one of them is because the guy was literally committing fraud, like faking bank documents, right? And they caught him. And the other one was, I forgot the reason why. I forgot the reason of the other one. But generally, it's like not a thing that happens as long as everyone is lined up to make sure things work properly.
Okay, in terms of multiple parties, does it have to be individuals or do they have to be corporated?
Oh. Got it. So the 2 questions were, what is the entity you would make if you have partners? And then the second question is, do you need to be on site or live there? So I'll answer the first one. You don't need to be anywhere because we have professional builders building it and we have professional property managers managing it for you. So you can sit here comfy in your PJs all day and just deal with your accountant on a yearly basis to file your taxes. I would always recommend flying out there and checking it out. I mean, it's $300 give or take round trip to go to Edmonton. You can fly in and out the same day and go check it out. Personally, I'm excited when I buy something. You know, for me, it's an adventure to go see it. On the entity side, CMHC does not speak to the entity of ownership, right? If you want to own it in your personal name, you want to own it in a corporation or some other type of entity structure. But I would recommend that you definitely own any real estate, investment real estate in a corporation. In fact, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable selling you it unless you had a corporation, because this is not renting out the basement of your house. This is a business, right? And you have to realize that things can go wrong in a business, and you want to isolate the liability. Like, take a worst case scenario, the building burns down and people pass away or die. Obviously you're insured, but you could have lawsuits going on for years, right? You don't want that touching you personally. You want that isolated. In fact, I recommend every building you buy should be in its own corporation, because that way you're isolating all your liability. As well, if you have different partners in different projects, you completely isolate the ownership structure, and you can create different shareholder rules, right? What happens if a partner passes away? Do you want his wife to automatically get control, or do the other shareholders buy out the shares? Like, things like that are important to consider. Any lawyer knows all these standard questions. Like, there's like 15 or so like situations. They're all pretty standard, and you guys just pick as a group of shareholders what you want to do. But do not buy these in your personal name. It's a massive liability, and just alone, you don't want tenants calling you at 2 in the morning because they Googled your name, you know? But it's also from a tax perspective. You can move money, intra-corporate transfers and loans and things like that. You know, if you start owning a bunch of these and having substantial cash flows, you don't want that hitting your personal income at 53%. Yes.
If you move or decide to buy, when do I have to give the money as a deposit money or down payment money?
What's
Do we give it to the lawyer until the transaction happens, or whom do we give it to?
okay? So it's what's the deposit structure, and is the deposit in trust?
Sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned, some projects are lawyer's trust, some projects are builder's trust, just like you would have in Ontario. Generally, if it's like a multiplex, it's in lawyer trust, and generally on small freehold projects, it's directly to the builder's trust. The deposit structure will vary depending what the builder wants, but for the most general kind of thing is usually there's a sort of hold fee with the offer, similar to like a pre-con where you're putting like $10,000 or $15,000 to show you're serious for the contracts, and then the balance to 5% usually just after you firm up the deal. We don't usually spread it out because unlike a pre-con, you're not coming up with 20% deposit. So there's no real reason to spread out 5%. You either have the money or you don't. And remember that for application to CMHC, you have to have the money. So there's, you know, we don't want to be doing 18 checks of $1,000 a month. You just give the deposit and then you show CMHC the deposit's there. You have the receipt and we move on with our day essentially.
And unlike pre-con, it's
In Cashwick, is that a Cashwick in Ontario or Cashwick in Alberta?
That's in Edmonton.
Alberta.
It's a suburb of Edmonton.
Alberta?
Yeah.
And just to add, and like pre-con, it's not 4 years. Most of it's done within 6 to 10 or 12 to 24 months on the larger scale. Yeah. Yeah. From an investor stance, what's the buying process?
The most important part is pre-qualifying the purchaser, because we want to ensure that they have all those equity requirements. As much as I love to trust people, unfortunately we've learned people, as I said, tend to overestimate the size of the fish they catch, right? So generally what we will do is we'll do a very quick, what I call pre-qualification, where even me or one of our team members will ask you, like, very high level, do you have this, 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 and this? And I don't need exact numbers, but it's like, how much cash do you have on hand? About 100. How much this do I have, right? Because the reason we do that is because unfortunately we used to send everyone directly to our broker for a full qualification. A lot of extremely unqualified people were taking up their time, and if someone doesn't even have a deposit, they shouldn't be meeting the broker, right? So now we do a pre-pre. Once we say you look good, we send you over to the broker to do a much more detailed qualification where they'll actually dig in and check your account statements and say, yeah, this looks good. The reason is because we want to make sure that from the buyer side, there's absolutely no issues, right? Because the last thing we want is beautiful project, you're all excited about it, then we sign the deal and you send you to the broker and we find out there's something that would prevent you from buying. So we do the full pre-qualification first. Once you're pre-qualified, we kind of know what your buying capabilities are, and then it's just a matter of you kind of deciding how big you want to go, right? Because just because you qualify for $5 million doesn't mean you need to spend $5 million. In fact, I usually tell people buy something, 70-80% is the most I'd recommend, because you don't want to be awake at night from something, an investment you buy. Like, it shouldn't be keeping you awake at night, right? I mean, generally, these are relatively safe, but as I say, whenever you're investing, if it's not a government bond, you need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So once you kind of know what you're looking for, then we just start presenting you the inventory we have, and we can discuss the pros and cons of individual projects. When you find one you like, it's as simple as submitting us, the paperwork we need to get started, which is like any other purchase, your ID, your contact information, etc. They'll start drafting the contracts, and at the same time, they'll provide the instructions to send the initial deposit. Once you get the contracts and you've done the deposit, you sign it. Most of these deals will have the 10-day cooling period. We have Alberta lawyers we recommend, but you're more than welcome to get your own that will review the contract, find any amendments that are necessary, that kind of thing. What I generally recommend is just sign the deal in your personal name initially, because until you know you're going forwards and definitely firming up, there's no reason to create a new corporation and all the headaches that come along with it. So like any deal I do, or most of our clients, they sign with their personal name. Once they know, yeah, I'm firming up, I'm doing this deal, everything looks good, you ask the same lawyer to open you your new corp. The corp needs to be an Alberta corp. It can also be a federal corporation, but if it's a federal corp, it has to get licensed to operate in Alberta, so there's no real point in it, and Alberta has the lowest corporate taxes in Canada anyway, so Alberta Corp's good. You open up your corp, the builder sends the amendment to switch it over to the corporation, and then at the same time, you're working with the mortgage broker collecting all the paperwork you need to submit the file. Generally, the slowest part of that, you'll have everything done, is we'll be waiting on the full formal appraisal from the appraiser, because we get the appraisal done as like a, yes, I know this will be $5 million, but he's not doing a full 20-page appraisal. He only does that once it's sold, right? And then it comes at $5 million. But that's usually the slowest part. It takes the appraiser like a week or two, sometimes 3, depending on the backlog. As soon as the file's complete, we'll submit it when the time makes sense. If it's a closing 6-7 months, we'll submit it right away. If it's closing 10-11 months, we'll sit on it for a month and then kind of submit. At that point, there's nothing else for you to do. You're just relaxing and waiting, and a couple months before occupancy, depending on the size of the project, the property management that you select will begin the pre-leasing. So on a small project, 5, 6, 10 units, you'll probably start leasing 90 days out. On a large project, you'll probably start, when I say large, like 50 plus units, like a large scale development, start leasing around 180 days out. So most small projects right now in Edmonton, we're hitting 100% occupancy before delivery. Right, so 100% leased, because again, 5 units is not that much to lease out. 8 units is not that much to lease out. Bigger projects, you'll probably want to be around 50 to 60% occupied at completion. And the reason is not because we couldn't fully occupy it, but because if you fully occupy a 100-unit building on day one, it means you left money on the table, right? So you want to squeeze that juice and keep raising the rents every 10% you lease. Well, it doesn't matter so much on a 6-plex or 8-plex, but you'll talk with that property manager as well about their lease-up strategy. And they, on big buildings, they'll put together a full strategy, because especially in some neighborhoods, you are actually kind of setting the rent. You're setting the market, right? So you have to do that right, or you create the wrong expectations for a long time. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like any other kind of resale deal or pre-construction deal. There's a referral arrangement, essentially. Sure. The question was, what was the price? What markets or like type of product do we cover, and what is the price per door? So, I am agnostic to the market as long as the price makes sense. I don't care. I'll buy the shittiest building in the shittiest neighborhood if the price makes sense, right? But everybody has their own sort of requirements. Most of the product we offer is going to be mid-tier stuff. We're not offering, we get a few luxury buildings all the time, but I'm kind of live of the motto that if you want to be rich, sell to the poor, and if you want to be poor, sell to the rich. Rich clients are the worst people on earth to deal with when it comes to real estate. You'll make a lot more money dealing with average renters than you will dealing with the hoity-toities of the world, right? So generally, we target kind of 2 neighborhoods for stuff. Like we'll do either, there are some AAA sites we have in like Bonnie Doon, Glenora, McKernan, but then a lot of our stuff will also be kind of in the suburbs. Or like if you want to compare it to Toronto, I would say between like Yonge and Finch and Richmond Hill kind of range. We generally avoid downtown because downtown has higher crime, higher vacancies, higher problem tenants, and you're paying a higher cost for land and construction. So we're kind of midtown to suburbs. And we have a mixture as well between production builds and infill sites. My personal favorite is infills, because if you're building in an established neighborhood, it's got a little more culture, a little more pizzazz, right? It's like buying an apartment building in the annex versus buying it in like a brand new development in Pickering or something. There's nothing necessarily wrong with buying in a brand new development in Pickering, but I just think, maybe I'm right or wrong, but I think if you're buying in an established neighborhood and you're adding needed housing somewhere that's already got, you know, commercial and restaurants and all that other stuff, it's better. Price per door will depend on the product. But generally, on large multiplexes, you'll be anywhere from around 250 to 270 for like a large project, and we're talking 250 to 270,000 a door for like a large building that's like an apartment building. Small townhomes, or in the past detached product, where you're looking at maybe like upstairs units that are 1,500 square feet and downstairs units that are like 600-700 square feet, you'd be looking at around 290 to 310 a door, depending on the area. New build. Yeah. We don't do any resale stuff. Correct.
Do you have any project in Ontario? And if not, and say I'm a realtor, and if I bring a project, would you take over and build and maybe help bring the clients too?
Yeah, the question was, do we have projects in Ontario? And if someone could bring projects in Ontario, would we work on it? My answer is, I don't have any projects in Ontario because I call it Onterrible right now. And for all the reasons I outlined, you know, just development charges alone are brutal. Brutal, 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 brutal. And the way CMHC financing works, by the way, is they will not, if you're doing a construction loan, they will not pay out the construction loan starts until after you have shovels in the ground. You have to pay development charges first, meaning you need the cash to pay the development charges. You can get them reimbursed in your construction loan, but you still need the money. So what's the point of a 5% down deal if you need to come up with hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars of DCs, right? A lot of municipalities are seeing that problem now, like we saw Mississauga is reducing them, but it's still bullshit. Why do they exist? It's a fucking scam. I don't care what anyone says. It's literally a scam to pay DCs like that. The other problem is the rental-related issues around the landlord-tenant board, and just generally the costs. Like, again, I'm not saying that these can't be done in Ontario. There's people who have a whole business doing it, but every project I've seen in Ontario sits mostly around 15% down to make the deals work, because I can't make the numbers work otherwise. Am I happy to look at anything you have and offer it out to the market, to our buyers? Absolutely, because there's definitely people who just want Ontario, and that's fine. I'm happy to do. Question was, who can buy? So technically, to qualify for this program, you have to be, you know, a citizen or a PR holder. But because of the corporate structures, you can make anything work, right? As long as the main shareholders, the majority shareholders, are Canadian. So if you want to have 20% shareholder from overseas and they're giving all the money to a Canadian, and they work that out in a way where it's all under the Canadian, but they can be a shareholder, not my business, right? But they will not qualify any net worth or any liquidity or anything from a non-Canadian. So someone can be a beneficial shareholder, but they will not be part of the qualification program. Sorry? To the foreign person? Of course. That's why we're here. We don't work for free. If we're going to make someone rich, why can't we be rich doing it, right? That's the other difference, just so you know, and I have no shame in saying this, is there's this whole thing that realtors do where they're embarrassed about making money, because in residential real estate, maybe it's a little embarrassing to make so much money for fluffing some pillows and opening some window blinds. But when you're providing someone with immense value, when you're offering them opportunities that make them more money than any other risk-adjusted asset, why shouldn't you get paid? Right? What do hedge funds charge? They usually charge 2% of the entire assets under management and 20% of the profit. That is a shitload of money. Why do people line up and go to those hedge funds? Because some of these hedge funds have been averaging 20% returns for people for 30 years straight. So I would line up all day and pay that money if a guy is making that kind of money for me. He should become rich for making me money. Commercial is a totally different game. In commercial, there's enough money for everyone to make money, and everyone can do well together. But if you're a smart realtor, you'll buy these with your client, because then you can put your commission in as part of your deposit, and you can end up owning a lot of apartment buildings, and you'll thank me for that in about 20 years. Generally, yes. Not always, but generally, yes. Well, you haven't got any yet. So the question was if we believe that a lot of people have internally migrated to Alberta because it sucks living in Vancouver and Toronto and stuff now, and if we tighten up immigration, which is clearly coming and already started, will that cause people to return? I'm always wrong when I predict the future, but I like to predict it anyway. My answer is no. And the reason is for a couple reasons. Number one, if you've ever lived in these cities, they're actually quite nice places to live. But more importantly, these are not small towns. They're both cities over 1.2 million. I believe Calgary's around 1.4, Edmonton's around 1.2. So it's not like you're giving up some major stuff in Toronto, right? Like, again, as I say, you still have all the fancy restaurants, you still have the theater, you still have the concerts, all the DJs and stuff still go out there. Both of them have an NHL team. Both of them have a CFL team. Like, they're substantial metropolitan areas. I think Calgary was rated like number 4 city to live in North America recently, right? But the more important thing is that show me where the actual cost of living in Ontario is dropping. Because, yes, rents have come down slightly, but it is still unbearably unaffordable here. And I think no one wants to be a renter forever. And the price of housing in Ontario has not dropped anywhere near enough for the average income. You can buy a detached house in Calgary for under $700,000. You can buy a detached house in Edmonton for under $500,000. Until you can buy a detached house in Toronto for under $500,000 or $600,000, those people will never come back. And once you've put down your roots, you bought your house, you have your family there, why would you come back? I'm sure there's always going to be people that move around, but if you actually can afford to live there and your life is good, there's no reason to come back. Well, it can be pretty so the question was, will the growth stop? I don't know. Again, I can't predict the future 100%, but what I can tell you is that even if the growth stopped today, there's a backlog of housing needed across Alberta, specifically in Edmonton, because they had a much bigger lag to getting investors and people going there. So they probably still need around 50,000 more doors delivered before they get kind of back to where they were before the internal migration happened. And if that happens and you're in now, then you're fine, right? And over the long run, there'll always be renters. I mean, Avenue Living is one of the largest REITs that's been in Alberta for a long time, well before Alberta turned into this like hot investment spot. Their entire thesis was Alberta had, specifically Edmonton, had a lot of high-paying blue-collar workers. High-paying blue-collar workers don't cause problems. They pay their rent, but they stay in the home for a long time. They're easy tenants to deal with. They made billions of dollars doing that over the last couple decades, regardless of the recent kind of gold rush there, right? So no, I can't predict the future 100%. No one can. But I think that people will continue to go there until the cost of living is actually solved in Vancouver and Toronto. And I don't see those being solved anytime soon. Toronto just passed 7 million people. The traffic is worse every day. They just raised property taxes another 7%. They increased the development charges. You have a literal communist mayor running the place. All the parks are filled with crackheads and homeless people. And I'm not judging them. But then there's also one other element, and I try to stay out of politics, but I lived in Alberta for a while, is they're also the only sort of not woke province in Canada. And trust me when I say that, a lot of people go out there and they enjoy the more traditional views of the average population out there. So people actually quite like it, right? Edmonton can get cold. Calgary, not so much. Calgary gets the Chinooks. It's very warm there. It's actually the sunniest city in North America, over 300 days of sunshine. Edmonton can get cold, but it's usually, I know this is going to sound like a joke, but it's like a dry cold. Like, I would rather have minus 20 in Edmonton than minus 10 in Toronto, because without the moisture in the air, it's not so bad. But again, I would also rather be in minus 20 in Edmonton in my 2,000 square foot house that I can afford than minus 10 in Toronto in a 300 square foot studio condo. Yes? So what's the next market after Alberta was the question. I used to tell people I thought Saskatchewan, and my thought process was that Saskatchewan is a resource-based economy with high incomes, generally right-wing, and that's kind of my entire investment thesis. The challenge with Saskatchewan is the cost of building is higher than Alberta, which I was surprised because we started doing our research about investing there. The problem is that the market is so small that, and all the good trades have gone to Alberta because there's an Alberta boom, so it's very hard. The cost of labor, the cost of materials is high. The other problem is Saskatchewan has relatively low affordable rents. So I think deals can work there. We haven't been able to paper any yet, but we also haven't like looked really hard, so that's kind of on me. The other market we're looking at, funny enough, is St. John's, Newfoundland, because it's a very small little place, but they have a housing crisis. And because it's such a small little place where they basically never have ever built an apartment building, they don't know what to do. So their planning infrastructure was not properly set up to handle the massive increase in population they had, because everyone in St. John's, Newfoundland would literally just buy a detached house on a 100-foot lot. So like they don't have the planning process to be like, we need to build like a multiplex or we need to build like an infill thing. So there's this need for housing, but they don't have any way to actually approve it, and then there's no builders to build it. So we've been talking to a builder out there, and it's kind of funny to say because their backlog of housing, they need about 5,000 doors. That might sound like a really small amount, but I don't know what the population of Newfoundland is, but relatively it's like a shitload big problem for them, right? And basically there's people living in hotels, not like homeless people, like fully employed people are living in hotels because there's literally no houses available. So we're currently looking at 2 projects, about 45 and 60 units there, that like based on the research we've done, like the day we advertise, all of them will be rented, right? And they have reasonably favorable landlord laws. They're not as good as Alberta, but they're not as bad as Ontario. But I think it's such a small market, like we'll sell like 5 projects and then like we solve the housing crisis. Yeah, no problem. I'll go to the back. Question was towns. Towns are still fine. To clarify, so just for online people, the question was how many do we sell? So the minimum application size for CMHC is a 5-plex. So any project we're selling is 5 or more. Most of the projects we do, like the majority of projects are between 8 and 12 units for a couple reasons. One, a lot of infill lots just kind of fit a project that size. Like you don't really just find a random lot in a city that's big enough to build 25 units. But the other reason is because generally investors have the money to buy an 8 or 12 unit building. There's very few people that can go out and buy a 50 unit building in one shot, right? Yes. When you say local market, do you mean here or in Edmonton? Yeah, correct. But yeah, I mean, so the question was, since the detached, you know, we're kind of in limbo on that. I like to say we're in limbo because they shut it down, but they haven't given us an answer why, and we think they're going to reapprove it. But is semis the better option? We haven't got 100% clarity on the semis either. That's the weirdest part. So we are cautiously proceeding on all of our semi-detached deals, but we're leaving the conditional period open until we get a 100% answer, and we're explaining that to buyers. Potentially. I mean, that's a little bit different of a story, but again, if we can make the numbers paper, right? If you have a site, again, the question, yeah. So I forgot, for the online people, is just asking about a project in Toronto, so not a really relevant question, but we can always look at it. The challenge, again, is going to be the development charges, especially in Toronto. Semi-detached, they're going to fucking clip you, man. It's crazy. It's like $100,000 a door. That's the problem. Let's paper it, and we'll see. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, so the challenge is, again, detached product to them is literally like individual houses touching air on all 4 sides on 4 separate lots or 2 separate lots, right? So in theory, semi should be okay. Semi-detached and the garden suite's not an issue. It's on the same lot. It's more just becomes a question of like they still have not provided 100% clarity on the semi-detached product. It's wild they would leave something like this so up in the open. So we have between the 4 lenders we use, 2 of them are just going forwards and submitting applications, and 2 of them are cautiously waiting. We have chosen to cautiously wait. Maybe I'm just not that exciting of a guy. Yeah. It's not considered a detached, it's considered a semi-detached product, and that's where we don't have 100% clarity. And that's why, as I said, we're cautiously waiting, leaving those, all of the buyers of those are left in, we're leaving them open, basically. They understand the situation, and we are not firming their deals, and our builders are awesome. They're willing to just sit and wait, essentially. Yes. No, because we're an Ontario brokerage and we're giving you the referral, the co-op agreement. So it's between our brokerage and your brokerage, so it's not an issue. And then in terms of how we deal with the builder, you don't need to stress about it. Who didn't? Yes. Oh, you lost it? Oh, it happens to me all the time. Okay, I don't know. I feel bad whoever I pick. Okay, she's got it. I got to give it back to her. Yeah, so it doesn't, the question was, are they A lenders? And the answer to that is it doesn't quite work like that with MLI. There's certain funds and like pension funds, insurance companies, they like this product. So it's not about whether they're a schedule bank or not. Generally, the schedule banks do not get involved in MLI unless you're talking about like 100 million plus in size. So most of this is all done through a bunch of sort of, they're not private lenders, but they're private funds that really like this space. So like CMLS, ICI Bank, Peak Hill Financial, Green Birch, our private lender, I use the word private lender lightly because you're still getting AAA rates. It's not like it's private lending like when you're hoping to keep your house, but they're just people who take big piles of money and they basically are lending money without risk because it's insured with CMHC. It's a very lucrative career, right? So like we have a private lender, Trans Energy, who's literally an energy company that decided they had a shitload of extra money lying around and wanted to become a lender, basically. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we have on our Google Drive all of our current inventory, and then projects that are in various stages. You can always go and visit them out in Edmonton if you want. We can set up tours with the builders, that kind of stuff.
Do you come to the office, or how do we get the information of what's available and what we can
Yeah,
offer to our clients?
all online. We make it easy for you. We keep a live. So the question was, where do you see the inventory? We'll send it to you after the meeting, but we have a live online sheet that shows the status of every project, links to the folders, all the details there. We make it as easy as possible.
That gentleman's been waiting.
Yes. The question was who's responsible for the lease up. The property management will handle the lease up. Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is, we streaming it on YouTube, and then YouTube magically will turn it into a video that is recorded, so you guys can, our email, Meta Realty. Yeah, just look up I'm becoming an influencer now. I have 150 subscribers. I'm a big deal. Yes, like and subscribe. Awesome. Thank you, guys. If there's any other questions, thanks for bearing with us till like 9 o'clock.